Jordan Maxwell is a preeminent researcher, independent scholar in the field of occult religious philosophy. He served for 3.5 years as the religion editor of Truth Seeker magazine, which is America's oldest free thought journal. His work on the subject of secret societies, both ancient and modern, and their symbols, has fascinated audiences around the world for decades. He has conducted dozens of seminars, hosted his own radio talk shows, appeared on more than 600 radio shows, and written, produced, and appeared in numerous television shows and documentaries. Much of his work is devoted to understanding ancient religions and their influence on world affairs. Hi, Jordan. How are you?
Well, hello there, George.
Always a pleasure.
Delighted to be with you tonight.
You have an extensive background in ancient mysteries and work. How did you get interested in this?
You know, I don't even know. I just, as a child, I gravitated toward the, for lack of a better term, the dark side of the world. I always realized and felt in myself that there is a whole world of knowledge out there for me, but I just didn't know where to go to look for it because I just didn't buy, what I see. I know there's more to life than what meets the eye. And so that's what really got me started as a child. And I grew up happily in a home where my parents, especially my mother, continued to promote me to read books and study and question everything. And I suppose it's just in my blood. I love the dark side.
That happened to me in terms of not necessarily the dark side, but a family that really pushed me into reading books about the unknown and to go ahead and start doing my own homework and start investigating on my own. And at the age of 11, 12, 13 years old, I started doing that. I think that helped my journalistic background a lot.
Without a doubt. I started asking questions when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, and the adults would look at me like I was a fool. But a classic example of a child's question when I was being confirmed in the Catholic Church, about 9, 10 years old, whatever it was, and we were told that the bishop would possibly ask the children after the service was over if they had any questions, and that we were told not to ask any questions, period. Well, that night after the services were finished, the bishop did ask, are there any questions from the children? And I stood up, scared to death, of course, because I knew I wasn't supposed to. And I asked the bishop, I said, my father works with torches. I mean, he's a welder. Could I take a torch and burn an angel? Would it hurt him if there was an angel here and I hit him with the torch? And nobody said anything for a few moments, and then he said, well, of course not. And I said, why not? And he said, well, because you can't burn an angel. I mean, fire is a natural thing. It takes a wood or paper or something to burn, but you can't burn an angel. And I said, why can't you burn an angel? And he said, well, because angels are spirits, and you can't burn a spirit. So I said, why am I worried about going to hell when my spirit will burn if you can't burn a spirit? And it was quiet all over the church, and I knew from that moment on there's more to the story than meets the eye on everything.
Absolutely. What a great question for an 8 or 9-year-old to ask.
Well, I'm just looking at the words and putting the words together, and that's what I've been doing all my life.
Now, when you talk about your interest in the dark side, explain what that means.
Yes, I do not mean that I am interested in the dark side to learn from it. I am interested to learn about it, meaning that there is always more to the story, as I said, than meets the eye on everything. And a classic example, if you're going to build on a foundation, say on a second floor, and you're going to put a lot of weight, like printing presses or whatever, the smart thing to do before you go starting to build on that foundation is to go downstairs, get on a ladder, and go through the ceiling tiles and look at the foundation of the floor. Look at the beams to see if the floor is going to hold that kind of weight. So what you're doing now is you are standing under the foundation to get understanding, because that's where the word understand comes from, to go under the foundation to see what it's really based on.
Good point, Jordan. A few years ago in Kansas City, Missouri, at the Hyatt, they had a collapse of a corridor.
Oh, yeah.
And because it just had too many people standing on it. And I would guess their architectural studies, they did not factor in a total amount of people that would be able to walk there on any given time.
That's
and
right.
It collapsed. And it's exactly what you say. If you don't build that foundation first, the whole thing collapses.
That's exactly right. I mean, if you're going to ship a package, for instance, a big package, and you go out in the garage and you find some rope, and you tie the package up, well, the rope is probably going to be fine for the shipping. But if you're going to take that same rope and hang it off of a 10-story building and put your life on it, and you're going to hang on it, now you better check the integrity of that rope. You better find out if it's going to hold you, because...
As long as your neck's not around it, right?
Right. Because your decisions in life are only as good as your information. And this is what has bothered me from as far back as I can remember, that there are always two kinds of facts, the kind you look up and the kind you make up. And too many people get in trouble. Then their lives are filled with trouble because they just haven't done their homework. They have been told by other people, and this is something I really don't like, is when other people, the word is project. When other people project on you what it is that they want you to believe, that is absolutely destructive to any person's development. You never know. You might have a small child who's a genius, who's questioning everything and might do something very big in life. But if you continue to put the child down and tell him not to ask questions, I mean, who was it? It was I'm trying to remember his name. One of the scientists said that when he was a child, he used to ask the teacher, "Why is it we children have to answer your questions, but you don't have to answer ours?" So my point being,
he was a smart Alex scientist,
yeah.
huh?
But always keep in mind, as I have always, I like this one quote I heard many years ago. It says, "Always trust a person looking for the truth. Don't ever trust the one who's found it." The point being is that there is so much more to life than what we know, so many more facts that we're not privy to know. And even when you've got everything nailed down and all in a line, and then you find out 10 years later all the facts were wrong, and now you start all over again, because this is a continuing process. You cannot look at the monolithic structures of the world all over the earth and not know that there were profoundly brilliant people far, far back in time. And unfortunately, our religious and political establishment have marginalized all of those things. And it's only until, like myself, you go to Egypt and go into the pyramids and go into the temples, do you really begin to appreciate the profoundness of these ancient people and what they were doing.
Why do you think they marginalize this? I mean, what do they have to gain by doing that?
Well, I think that its bottom line is control. And you naturally, if you want to control people, you must control what they know. You don't want to have to run for You don't want to run for mayor in a town filled with profound geniuses and
they don't need you, right?
Superior people. The more you can keep them occupied watching basketball, the better off everybody's going to be. And so I think that the religious system, especially the religious system, and I have nothing against spirituality at all. I'm talking about the corporate religious systems that came out of Europe. We're talking about 2,000 years or 1,600 years at least of the church dominating Europe, and the Europe, of course, dominating the world. And there is an agenda which has been outlined thousands of years ago, and it's still in operation today.
With this agenda and with as you talked about some of the incredible buildings that were left behind years ago, do you think they were made by societies who developed their own technology, or do you think they had some help from someone up there?
They had help from somebody out there. That's just my subjective opinion, but my gut feeling is as brilliant as this creature we call man is, and it is an incredible creation, we humans, but I don't think that we have the ability to do all the things that were done. There's no doubt in my mind that we are not alone in the universe, and it's always, George, amazed me to hear scientists and astronomers philosophizing in fields that they are not prepared to talk about. But they talk about the fact that we obviously know that there's life out there, but they could never get here because the distances of space are just too much. I think how absolutely ludicrous that is for an intelligent person to make a statement like that, when the fact is you don't know how far along these people or these entities have progressed. You don't know what their evolution is.
Precisely.
They've been around for hundreds and hundreds of millions of years.
I mean, these scientists are making reference based on the technology they understand today.
Well, of course,
yeah.
But we were told that a man's body could not go to more, what was it, 25 miles an hour back in 1920s? We were told you couldn't go any more than that. 25 miles an hour, the human body cannot stand. Well, so much for that wisdom. And as I said, things just keep changing. The more we change, the more we stay the same.
You have ufology has also been a part of your entire history now, hasn't it?
Yes, very, very big. I have always been interested. I was born and raised in Pensacola, Florida, and right across the bay from me was Gulf Breeze.
Yeah, oh, that's right.
And I grew up in Pensacola myself, and I don't know why me, but I grew up having all kinds of otherworld experiences. I mean, there's very difficult to try and explain it, but my whole life was filled with strange things happening, seeing strange things that other people didn't see, or having experiences that other people couldn't relate to. And so I am totally sure there is something very legitimate going on in that area of Pensacola.
Did you get going in your career? Did the Barney and Betty Hill case get you going as it did me?
No, I really wasn't very well aware of that one. But my own personal experiences are what got me going. I mean, as a child, I would wake up. I put my bed purposely by my window so I could look up at the moon and the stars at night. and I'd lay there at night looking and thinking about what might be out there in space, and then I'd fall asleep, and I'm talking about 10, 12 years old.
Yeah.
And then I would wake up in the middle of the night, and I would see someone at my window, right, and my head's right there at the window. And they would be there looking at me, and when I wake up, I'd see them, but they would move instantly. But I saw them, but they would move, and I quickly, as a kid, you'd move very quick. I pop open the screen, and the yard is lit by the moon. There's no one there.
But you're convinced someone was.
Oh, yeah, I saw them.
Yeah.
So, and then, of course, I had some extraordinary experiences with spirit entities coming into my bedroom. I woke up one night, maybe 9, 10 years old. I woke up one night absolutely screaming my head off. I was totally ballistic. I was crying and yelling because I knew that there was an entity in my bedroom, and it was extremely evil, and I knew it. And my mother, of course, screaming at that hour in the morning, 2 in the morning. Everyone in the neighborhood was hearing it, and my dad and mom kept trying to come into my room, but I was screaming and jumping up and down the bed, crying, "Don't come in the room. He's here."
You were trying to protect them.
I was trying to protect them, and that's all I remember, is I wanted to protect them from the entity that was in my room. And it finally went through the wall, and I felt him. I didn't see anything, but I felt the entity leave the room, and I knew where he left. I pointed to the wall. I said, "He's just left." And then I fell on the bed, and I was totally exhausted. So I've had these kind of experiences quite literally all of my life. So I am totally, positively sure that we are more than what we think we are. There's more to the human race than what meets the eye.
No question about it. Jordan, do you believe that entity, when you were a child, was the boogeyman that so many children have reported seeing?
Well, I wouldn't be a bit surprised. This was not my experience was not with something that was a scary boogeyman. This was a very, very frightening experience.
This was worse than that, then?
It was far worse than that. I was totally ballistic. I was screaming my head off, and I was frightened to death. I could not see what the entity looked like, but it was there. And a child that age does not go totally off the chart that bad for no reason. And when it left, I felt it go out of the room. And so as far as that was, as I said, that was not the only experience, but that was one I will never forget. And we talked a little bit about the UFO.
Yeah.
2 points I would like to make. First of all, preface that by saying that I've done a lot of radio over the years myself. I've had my own radio show and been interviewed by many people. But you are an excellent host. I am very happy to be on the show and talking with you because it's such a pleasure to talk with you.
Oh, thanks.
And in relation to the UFO, I've been asked if you believe in UFOs. No, I don't believe in UFOs. I don't have to. I know they're here. And I have to tell you a quick story that happened to Ivy West, who you know.
Yes.
And myself and Paul Tice, who you'll have to know later. I was, this was back in 92. Back in 1992, I was going to be the best man at my friend's wedding up in Palmdale, which is about 60 miles north of me. And I went up there to spend the day with him, and as everyone was getting ready for the wedding, his wife-to-be went out with her mother and girlfriends to the market, and they came back, and there was an old man following them in the car, and he got out and followed them up to the house. And we wondered, who is this? And he came up, and the girl said to me, she said, we met this man in the market, and he said he needs to talk to the best man at my wedding. And she said, how do you know I'm getting married? He said, I just need to talk to the best man. And so she let him follow her home because he was an old man and didn't look very dangerous.
Suspicious, yeah.
And so I said, well, okay, talk to me. And he said, I've been told to tell you that you're going to be in a car and you're going to be driving the car yourself. And there's going to be a lady in the front seat and a man in the back seat, and you're going to be way out in the desert, and you're going to have a tremendous UFO confrontation, but it will not happen for at least a year and a half. It's going to be a year and a half from now. And I said, well, sometimes my friend and I go up to to the desert at night looking to see what we might see. And he said, no, this is going to be way out in the desert, and it's going to be east of California, and they are going to pick the time for you to see them. And so he said, but remember, a year and a half from now, and you'll be driving. Well, a year and a half from then, I was speaking at a conference, a UFO conference over in Mesquite, Nevada. And on the way back on Sunday, I had Ivy in the front seat and Paul in the back seat. And we were talking, and I said, have you ever been up to Area 51? Well, no, none of us had. So we turned around and decided to go up. And we get up there, and we're sitting and talking with Joe and Pat Travis, the lovely people who own the Little Alien up in Rachel, Nevada.
Yes.
And so we're sitting up there, and then when they're closing that night, about 11 o'clock, 11:30, I said, Joe, where do we go to see UFOs? And he said, go out in the parking lot, they'll find you. And so Pat says, well, if you want to go where all the tourists go, you go out on the highway and go back south toward Las Vegas, back south, and go exactly 20 miles. And you'll see a big mailbox there. That's the famous black mailbox. And just sit there and wait and see what will happen. So we got in the car, and as we're driving out, Ivy's in the front seat, Paul's in the back, I'm driving. I got onto the highway and turned left, going north. Ivy didn't catch it, I didn't, or Paul. We went 20 miles north of Alien rather than south, and when we got to the 20-mile mark, we slowed down, put on the bright lights, looking for a mailbox, couldn't find one. So we decided to turn around and go back to the Alien. Mm-hmm. Well, as we stopped the car, right where we stopped the car, there was a road leading off out into the desert, a well-kept level road. And Ivy and Paul said, let's go out in the desert. And I said, well, you're out in the desert. You don't have to go any further.
Yeah, I don't want to go any further.
I don't want to go any further into the desert. And it was totally overcast, from sea to sea, totally overcast. Couldn't see a thing. And they wouldn't stop. They said, let's go out. So I did. We drove out a couple, 3 blocks, and then all of a sudden I felt very strongly that we have done something wrong. I knew that we were in a wrong place at the wrong time. I backed the car up to turn it around, and I said, Ivy, I'm getting out of here. I'm scared. There's something wrong, and I don't know what it is, but I'm trusting my gut feeling. And Ivy and Paul jumped on me and said, look it, park the car. We get out for a couple of minutes. So I said, all right, but I don't feel good about this. They said, park the car, get out for a couple of minutes. So I did. We could not have been out of the car more than 1 minute when the clouds just north of us, and remember, it's very dark on the desert at that hour, like about 1:30 in the morning, when it's totally overcast, no light, period. And just north of us, the cloud began to open up, a hole in the cloud, and 2 beautiful bluish-white glowing disc-shaped things came floating in, not zipping by, but slowly floating through the hole, coming, and as they came through the opening of the clouds, they leveled off so that their light reflected off of the clouds above them, and each one of them appeared about the size that the moon appears, the full moon appears in the sky. So they were not little dots of light. These were beautiful, about the size of the moon, gorgeous, glowing blue and white disc. As we were shocked when we saw these 2 discs come through, 5 more followed them. Now there were 7 bluish-white discs hovering above us, making no sound whatsoever and scaring me to death. Ivy and Paul are jumping around like they've seen Santa Claus for the first time. They loved it. I was scared because I knew I have never seen anything like this. I'm from Pensacola. I know what the Naval Air Station has.
Exactly.
I've seen all the top-of-the-line stuff. But this was not anything I have ever seen. And I was legitimately frightened. And I told Ivy, I said, we're getting out of here, Ivy. I don't know what this means. I don't know who they are, and I'm scared. I want to get out of here. And so Ivy and Paul jumped in the car because they knew I was serious. They rolled the window down. I put my foot to the floor, flipped on the lights, and took off. When I did, immediately Ivy and Paul went totally ballistic, now themselves screaming at each other, and now they're scared big time.
What are they scared about?
And I kept screaming at Ivy because I am frightened. Ivy is now screaming, a woman screaming in your ear while you're driving fast. It's an extraordinary adventure. And so
been there, done that.
Yeah. So I screamed at Ivy. I yelled at her. I said, Ivy, shut up. I'm trying to get out of here. And she's screaming. And so I stopped the car quickly and threw open the door, and those 7 disc-shaped things were now down on us.
Oh,
they
my
were
God.
huge. And they were zipping around the car. They were doing extraordinary things of coming together in a circle, blowing out into a 7-pointed star, coming back into a circle, blowing back out into a 7-pointed star, doing all kinds of extraordinary stuff. And they weren't hurting us, they were frightening me, and now they've got the attention of Paul and Ivy, and they're scared. We got back out on the highway, and we stood there, and all the emotions started pouring out. There were tears, there were laughing, it was beautiful, it was frightening, it was this and that. We went back to the motel, and for about an hour, you can imagine, the conversation was, what in the world did we see tonight? Made no sound whatsoever and did things that we have never seen any craft do. And later the next morning, I got up, and Ivy and Paul were over at the Little Alien having breakfast, and I went over, and I saw a bunch of people sitting around the table listening to Ivy and Paul, and I thought they were talking about what, they were telling the people what happened to us last night. No, they were telling the people what happened to them in the bedroom last night that I slept through. And Paul and Ivy were visited, or they let me sleep through it, obviously, But Paul was visited in the bedroom at the Lily Inn, and so was Ivy. One of these days you'll have to ask Ivy to tell you the story. It was an extraordinary story.
That's and how does that tie in then to the old man who sent you on that merry way a year and a half before that?
I know. He told me I would be in a desert, way out in the desert. He told me that there would be a woman and a man, and incidentally, he told me, and I asked him why specific, and he said there has to be a woman and a man, because it needs to be two witnesses to what you're going to see, because the event is not for them, it is for you, but they want a man and a woman to be a witness to what you're going to see. And there's a lot more to that story, because it continued on once we got back to Los Angeles, and I went back to San Diego, and that's even an incredible follow-up on the story we'll talk about another time. But nonetheless, I'm telling you this because I have personally seen some extraordinary and beautiful things that we refer to as UFOs. They made no sound whatsoever. They were right down over our car. They moved with a precision that I have never seen anything move with. They would stop, change places, and just stop and lock themselves in the air and not move, then zip, and moving around again. Man, what an experience.
Jordan, as you think about it now, do you think you had anything to worry about?
Well, no, because part of the experience is I went back out there, and I parked. It was a whole story, and I don't want to go into it, but I realized that if they meant us harm, we wouldn't even
be
talking
here.
about it. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I know that it was some kind of a contact, and obviously the man a year and a half before had been given that to tell me. And
what a sight.
Yeah.
What a sight.
What an experience.
Too bad you didn't have the old camera and video camera with you.
I know, but you know what? I don't think those things would happen.
If you did?
If you had, because I think they're a lot smarter than that.
I think they tap into your mind.
No doubt in my mind about that, yeah. And I think that they decide a lot of things. They will decide where they will meet you. They will decide what you will be doing and what you will have with you, and what, we got to assume that these beings, whoever they are far, far superior to our intellect. I mean, they're like giants and brilliant people looking at children at play.
Have you theorized why here, Jordan?
Say it again?
Have you theorized why they're here?
Yeah, I've got my feelings about it, but it's just a subjective theory. But I think that there's a very good possibility that they have always been here, that this is their Earth. We probably are someone's experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And they have always been here. But they are far, far clever. I mean, we do the same thing. You can have an ant colony on your desk in your office, and you're sitting and watching the ants living their little lives and never realizing, looking through the glass, that there's a whole world out there watching you.
Dropping a little food every once in a while.
That's it. So I'm convinced from my own self that we not only have been visited, but we are living simultaneously with entities from other places, and I am totally sure of that.
How has that affected then, Jordan, the perception of various religions since the beginning of time?
Oh, yes, that's the subject I love, because once you get into the occult or hidden, and let me clarify the word occult, is a Latin word simply meaning hidden. And so much is hidden. And once you begin to see the paintings from the Middle Ages and the temples and all of the ancient paintings, you begin to see UFOs and flying saucers everywhere. And we're told there's nothing in Judaism or Christianity that in any way would conflict with the idea of extraterrestrials. We talk about angels. The Bible, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, talk about sons of God. Well, the sons of God are totally different than angels. Doesn't mean the same thing at all.
That's
and then
true.
In the Old Testament, there's another entity called the Watchers. Well, this is in the Bible. This is Judaism of the Bible. This is Christianity, talking about angels.
And what's so fascinating, Jordan, is almost every culture talks about extraterrestrials in their own little way.
Absolutely. absolutely. No doubt about it. If you'll remember, Abraham, we're told in Genesis 18 that Abraham is sitting by his tent, and three men come walking up, and he goes out and bows down, prostrates himself before them, and bows down before them, and says, "What is my Lord saying to his servant?" And they said that they were on their way to somewhere else, and he said, and the scripture in Genesis 18 says that Abraham begged them to stay for dinner, and he had Sarah fix dinner for them. They sat and ate, and then the two of them got up and said they had to go other business, but the third one stayed for a little while to talk with Abraham, and the scripture says in the Bible, Genesis 18, that this was the Almighty God, the Creator himself, and he sat with Abraham, had lunch, thanked him, got up, and then left. Now in Genesis 19, the two men that he had entertained, we now find them in Sodom and Gomorrah, and now they're being called angels. And they go into Sodom and Gomorrah. They have supernatural powers. They cause blindness. Interesting, too.
Sounds like radiation, doesn't it?
Well, something. They had some kind of technology. And what's interesting is that the homosexuals thought they were good-looking men. Now, the sons of God, as we know, there's where is it in Genesis 6, where it said the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them all as wives. Well, the point being is that I can understand handsome, good-looking men talking women into the bed, but I cannot see some hideous sun creature from another world dazzling the females. So they must have been good-looking men. Well, this is what the Bible says in Genesis 1:28. It says that God created man in his own image, after his own likeness.
But let me ask you this. How many civilizations might be out there that are part of the same?
Yeah, goodness, I've heard there's over 50 from government people who were in a position to know, and they've told me it's well over 50 different ones that they know about, and there have been a lot of other good researchers who are talking about the same thing, but that's the ones we know about.
Which kind of leads us into secret societies, Jordan, something I have always, like you've been interested in reptilians, I've been always interested in secret societies, and you've done some work in that arena as well.
Yeah.
These societies go back since almost the beginning of mankind, don't they?
Oh, without a doubt, absolutely. You can trace the concept of people coming together for their own just causes, and not all secret societies are evil, of course. And I need to preface my comments here by saying I have never presented myself ever as being the world's foremost authority on anything. I'm too smart for that. I am painfully well aware
just about
of how much I don't know. So I'm not the world's foremost authority, but I've been looking at these kind of subjects for 43 years, and yes, the secret societies are a very powerful influence on the world today. There are things going on in the world today, politically and religiously, that would shock the normal person hearing it. And you can begin to pick up on there is a whole system of symbols and emblems and words and terms, catchphrases, flags, national coats of arms, presidential seals, corporate logos. All of this is a message. All of these different symbols are messages. They're telling you something. And symbols are very powerful. And we even use things like if you need some tape, we'll say, hand me the Scotch tape. Well, it may not be a Scotch company, but everybody thinks of it as Scotch tape.
Yes.
Well, because words and terms and propaganda is continually bombarding us.
They did a great marketing job. Same with tissue paper. You say, get me a Kleenex, right?
That's it. Exactly. Yep. And so consequently, I'm saying that we, in our world today, we have what is referred to as a consensus reality. The reality that we have all decided upon, for better or for worse, we've all decided is true. And so it's a consensus reality. Well, I am of the opinion that no, there's a lot more going on here that they haven't told you. Why is it that all birds, fish, and animals on the prairie, why is it that birds and fish all immediately fly in a different direction together? What causes that phenomena? What causes people all of a sudden to grab onto something and everybody's doing it? The hula hoop, you know, and the rap music. All of a sudden,
Same with clothes. You know, you're out here in Los Angeles and you see some woman buy a fad outfit, and they've all got it.
That's the point. And it's overnight.
Yeah.
And I have young people around me tell me, "Oh, I hear some noise on the radio." And they tell me, "Oh, this is the biggest group in the world. I mean, they've made millions." And I'm thinking, I've never heard this stuff before. And how long have they been out? They've been out for 3 weeks. Well, how could they be that big? Well, they are.
Well, let's talk about the motivation for secret societies, first of all, and without getting into specific names, because you don't have proof over who they might be.
Of course.
But you do have the ability to say what they might be, the kinds of people that are involved in these things, because I think it's bigger than governments. I think it's bigger than elected officials. And, you know, they're the puppet master of the puppets, and we're all the puppets here.
Well, no doubt about that.
What do they want, first of all, Jordan? They've got more money than God, don't they?
Well, yes, and if they don't, they can always print it, you know. They've got printing presses.
Legal printing presses, right?
That's right. And
but what do they want? What's their motivation here?
Well, again, I have to preface it by saying it's just a subjective opinion of mine, but I think that these people whom we would say are the puppet masters are themselves puppets of a higher power.
Oh, really?
Yes. I am totally convinced for myself that some of the most hidden, powerful people in the world are themselves, in subjection to higher authorities. And
how high might these other authorities go?
Well, now we're talking about, is there something to this story of extraterrestrials intermingling with the human family? As a matter of fact, I have to tell you this. I watched an hour television show a few years back on UFOs on one of the channels, and in it, Gordon Cooper he had about 2 or 3 minutes here and there, probably about 5 minutes total out of the whole hour, of Gordon Cooper making comments about his views on extraterrestrials and UFOs.
And he spotted a few.
Yes.
Yep.
So I called the producer, who I happen to know, and I asked him, I said, how long was the interview? Because I know what they do. They'll tape you for 2 hours and use 2 minutes.
Sure.
And so I said, how long was that interview? And he said, it's about an hour and a half at least. And I said, could you make me a copy of that whole interview? And he said, well, I'm not supposed to because it's...
you got the outtakes, huh?
Right. But I talked him into at least giving me a director's cut so I could watch the whole interview. Well, what I am telling you is absolutely astounding. The things which Gordon Cooper, he's a national hero.
Former astronaut to some people who may be 15 years old or 20, and they don't know who he was.
Well, he was an astronaut, and he was one of the first guys out there on the cutting edge.
One of the 7.
That's right. And he is a brilliant guy and very, very smart man, and he had to be an astronaut. Well, on this interview, they had, 3 camera shoot. And so when he was on camera and it was being interviewed by this young girl, it was a very interesting interview. But what really got interesting is when it was off camera. When they would shut the cameras down and they were going to move the set around a little bit, one of the cameras kept rolling. And they recorded the conversation between the hostess and Gordon Cooper off camera. And that's where it was interesting. And she asked him, and I still have a copy of this thing right here in my office. She asked him, what do you think about the idea of UFOs and extraterrestrials? And he said, I work with one. We have been working with him for some time. We found him in Mexico when he crashed. And our government went down and cordoned off the area where he crashed. We nursed him back to health. He's now with us in this country, and we've been working with him. And I've worked with him personally. So, and I thought, wow, man, put that on the air. In the Old Testament, both in the book of Isaiah and once in the book of Psalms, the Messiah, not Jesus, but Messiah, in the Old Testament is referred to with a Hebrew word called that is translated chief cornerstone. And so consequently, twice in the Old Testament, the Messiah is referred to as the chief cornerstone that the builders rejected. Then twice in the New Testament, Jesus is referred to as the chief cornerstone. Well, the word in the Aramaic and Greek and in the Hebrew all means the same thing. It means a triangle point on top of a pyramid. That's what the Bible symbol of the Messiah is. A triangle perched on top of a pyramid in Hebrew is called chief cornerstone.
And that's what is on our money.
And that's what it means. That's what it means on your money. That is the symbol of the Messiah of the Old Testament and the coming of God's Son to rule the world and God's kingdom. And, wow, man.
And they just leak it in like that, and nobody really knows it.
Nobody even suspects. And I did a 2-hour PowerPoint presentation up in San Francisco on that one subject, 2 hours of documents. And, of course, it was laborious, and people got tired because I'm always being told, you'd be surprised how many times I'm told when I'm through with a presentation, well, you didn't bring this out, and you didn't bring that out, and you could have talked about this or that. And I said, look, we only got an hour, we only got 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know, if this is all symbolism, Jordan, and nobody knows it, why'd they do it in the first place then?
Because it's an in-house thing.
Ah.
It's an in-house gesture.
It's for their own benefit.
Yes, yeah. It's an in-house communication. And the secret societies, both in Europe and around the world, know that that symbol on the back of the dollar bill, they know what it really means. They know that we don't, but they know what it actually means.
Do they communicate with each other through symbols?
Without a doubt. No doubts about that at all. They have certain emblems and symbols, and when the President of the United States speaks, he's not talking to you. He's talking to other world leaders who know who he is and what he represents. So it's a wonderful world of illusion, words and terms. And you were talking about electricity at the break.
Yeah.
Electricity, that's fascinating. Did you know that the planet Saturn was called El in the ancient Phoenician system, which we call today, that a whole area of Israel, Lebanon was called Phoenicia, and it's called the land of Canaan, but the people were Phoenicians. And in that ancient culture, they worshiped the planet Saturn. And consequently, Saturn in the old Phoenician system was called El, E-L. And consequently, if you still today worship the planet Saturn, you are called an elder, because you got elected through an election. Now you are one of the elites. And how did you get all of this? Well, you got the juice, the electricity, the very powers of the universe. El is the planet Saturn. They make movies about him. Saturn was referred to as the Lord of the Rings. Of course he's Lord of the Rings, and they're still making movies in Hollywood about Lord of the Rings.
And this symbolism stayed with us for thousands of years.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. The Greeks had it, the Romans had it, the British had it, and they gave it to us, and we're still running around using terms and words that haven't got the faintest idea in the world.
In a moment, we're going to be talking about Under the Eye of Power, how fear of secret societies shapes American democracy. Colin Dickey back with us on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Colin Dickey grew up in San Jose, California, a few miles from the Winchester Mystery House, and the most haunted house in America, by the way. As a writer, speaker, academic, he has made a career of collecting strange objects and hidden histories all over the country. He's a regular contributor to the LA Review of Books, Lamphams Quarterly, and is the co-editor with Joanna Epstein of the Morbid Anatomy Anthology. He's also a member of the Order of the Good Death, a collection of artists, writers, and death industry professionals interested in improving the Western world's relationship with mortality, Ph.D. in literature from the University of Southern California. Colin, welcome back. How have you been?
Hey, thanks so much for having me back on. I've been good. I've been well. How you been?
Great. Under the Eye of Power, how did you get involved in secret societies?
Oh, man. I mean, I think there's been so much talk in the past couple of, years or whatever about, the Illuminati and other stuff. And I wanted to kind of figure out how far all of this went back. So I decided to kind of do a deep dive sort of historically. I feel like we talk a lot about what's happening right now, but we don't talk about where, this stuff comes from. So I started to do the long history and sort of figure out how far back these ideas stretch, how far back these secret societies stretch, how long have we been concerned about them, what have they done at other moments in history, and just try to give us a kind of like, long history that explained the whole thing over a couple hundred years. So that was the idea. That kind of set me down this road, and here I am now.
When you were with me some time ago, not too long ago, about 2 or 3 years ago, we were talking about, I think, your work, The Unidentified, the mythical monsters. Remember that one?
Yeah, exactly, right. And this kind of grew a little bit out of that one. With that one, I was more focused on, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, the Lost Continents in Atlantis, and, of course, UFOs, which obviously are very much in the news today. And I think one of the things that I got out of that and sort of looking at, our history of UFOs and government cover-ups and that kind of stuff is to really try and figure out how that extended to a kind of larger view of various sort of theories about how, things are being hidden from us. People are kind of working behind the scenes to keep stuff out of the public eye. And that kind of led me down this road of, these secret societies and whether or not there's any truth to any of them.
Is there a paranoia about secret societies, or is it justified?
I mean, what I found is doing this book, I found a little bit of both. I found a lot of stuff that, it's pretty hard to prove. It's pretty hard to justify. And I found a lot of stuff that turned out to be, factually correct. And I think some of these examples, I think, are pretty well known. I started to just kind of look at, anything that was a group of people working in secret behind the scenes to kind of break the law or violate civil liberties or something like that. And some of the kind of unexpectedly obvious things I found were things like, the Underground Railroad, which fits that mode. These were people working in secret to violate the fugitive slave law, which was a horribly unjust law. So, good for them. So, I think we have had moments in our past where we have seen groups kind of doing this stuff, and I think other stuff has been, a little bit harder to prove and a little bit harder to verify. And so I wanted to kind of see if I could understand better what made for a legitimate conspiracy and what was maybe a little bit more far-fetched.
Colin, one group that keeps coming up on this program is Freemasonry and the Freemasons. And there's all kinds of discussions, whether they're good or bad, evil or not. What do you think?
Yeah, I found it so fascinating to do the history of the Freemasons. I think one of the things I found really interesting is I don't think we would have had this country without the Freemasons in some form, and that's good or bad depending on your perspective. But I think that the early founders, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, these guys were all Masons, and what they wanted, I think, when I really looked into what they were looking for, is they wanted a kind of aristocracy like the British had, but they didn't want it based on nobility and ancestry. They didn't want you to have to be born into it. They wanted it to be something that everybody could access. And joining the Freemasons was kind of a way of them being able to do that. So they would have these elaborate Freemasonry parades in Philadelphia and Boston, and they would show off their finery and their aprons and whatnot. And they were very public about it, and that's why there's all these Freemasonry symbols in the government on the $1 bill and all that stuff, because they weren't trying to hide it. It was very public, but it was this idea that they wanted to sort of display that they were kind of the first among equals, and they had sort of proven themselves to be kind of stalwarts of what an American citizen was going to be. And you can disagree with that estimation of whether or not they were right, but I think that's what they were trying to do. So I think we end up with a country that kind of found its footing through people adopting Freemasonry for better or for ill, I think.
What would you say in your research, Colin, did you stumble across that was one of the weirdest things that has happened in this country over the years?
Oh man, I mean, there's a lot of
There's many of them.
stuff. Yeah, I mean, how much time do you have tonight, George?
You've got 2 hours with us tonight.
I think one of the weirdest stories that I came across was this guy, this ex-French priest. His name was Chenique, and he came down from Canada. He renounced the Catholic Church. He became this real fervent anti-Catholic guy. And in 1850, he got involved in a defamation lawsuit, and he hired this young lawyer whose name was Abraham Lincoln, and Lincoln helped him get this defamation lawsuit dismissed. And as far as anybody knows, that was the last time these guys had any dealings whatsoever. But after Lincoln was assassinated, this guy Chenique published a memoir in which he claimed that, in fact, he had stayed in touch with Lincoln. And in fact, they were best friends. They were bosom buddies, and that he had secretly been going to the White House while Lincoln was in office.
Did he make all that up?
Yeah, not all of this is totally,
bogus.
This is all invented. Yeah, it was totally bogus. But he claimed that Lincoln was telling him all this stuff about how, it was actually the Catholics who were behind the Civil War. And if anything ever happened to him, it was the result of a Jesuit plot.
Colin, you were talking about Abraham Lincoln's best friend. Why would that doctor do that?
All right, this guy Chenique, who claimed that he was Lincoln's best friend. And this book was like a huge bestseller. Everybody bought this story, even though it was based on nothing. He just he wrote this whole memoir about they were best friends. Why did he do it? I think what he had a real bee in his bonnet about Catholicism, and he really thought that the Catholics were out to just undermine everything that's great about America, which I think is pretty nonsensical, but it was a pretty popular belief at the time. And I think it was a way for people to sort of they had been through the Civil War. It really messed people up, and they were looking for some kind of narrative. And for some reason, this one really just kind of grabbed people's attention, and they sort of allowed them to kind of forget maybe what had happened and why it had happened, I guess.
Tell us about William Morgan and what happened to him.
So this was fascinating. For all of the conspiracy theories around the Freemasons and all the kind of terrible things they've done, the one thing that they really did that's on record that is actually absolutely provable happened in upstate New York in 1826. This guy William Morgan was a Freemason. He got tired of the organization. He decided to leave. He was going to publish a book with the secret rites of the Freemasons, and he was going to make it public. And this annoyed his brothers, and they decided to harass him. They threw him in jail a couple of times on trumped-up charges, trying to get him to recant, and he refused to. The guy who was going to publish it, they burned down his printing press. Finally, in August of 1826, they threw William Morgan in jail again, and then this sort of mysterious figure shows up to bail him out. And at first, Morgan is pretty happy to be released from prison. They realize he doesn't know this guy, and as he's being hustled into a waiting carriage, Morgan shouts to the onlookers on the street, "Help! I'm being murdered!"
Oh, jeez.
That's the last anybody ever saw William Morgan, and nobody knows for sure what happened to him, but it seems like these guys in upstate New York, disappeared him, so to speak, and that as I said, for all of the conspiracy theories around the Freemasons, that's the one act of violence that can actually be attributed to any American Masons.
There was strange violence in this country during these days, wasn't there?
Yeah, it's fascinating that there was a lot of kind of, riots around that time. And I think maybe now we think of our history as sort of, a pretty peaceful one with a few notable exceptions. But it seems like we had riots pretty regularly, and they were used by different people to kind of, gin up, bigotry towards people, or to, keep people in line. And this Freemason event was, actually kind of par for the course, not by the Freemasons themselves, but just by Americans generally. We just seem to like to have a good riot every so often. That seems to be something maybe kind of baked into who we are, I guess.
Which is amazing. How did you come upon all these stories, Colin?
It's fascinating. I set out, as I said, I picked as my topic, I was going to look at groups, either real or imagined, who were working behind the scenes to, break laws or curtail civil liberties. And I just kind of cast a wide net. And in some cases, just sort of one thing would lead to another. And I would just sort of kind of follow a rabbit hole. And that's how I found out about, I was just kind of looking around for these kind of crazy, these anti-Catholic conspiracy theories like the Shaniqua guy. And that's how I found out about this convent in outside of Boston in 1834. It was, another kind of just crazy riot that just happened where, the local people in Boston decided they were just going to burn this convent to the ground. And I'd never heard of this before. I've spent a lot of time in Boston. I know a lot of people there. Nobody I know had ever heard of this before. And, Boston is known for the Boston Tea Party. It's known as a place that, kind of wears its riots proudly on its sleeve. And here was one that nobody was talking about, how they ransacked and destroyed this Catholic convent, based on this faulty notion that people were being held there against their will.
I go to Denver once a month to tape some television programs. You went to the Denver airport to do a little investigating.
I mean, you gotta, right? I don't know what your experience with the Denver airport is, but I've been going there, I don't know, for 20 years or so, and it's always like, why is it so far out? That's my big question. It's like takes forever to get there, and I guess I understand why people might think there's something going on there, just because it seems weirdly out in the middle of nowhere.
And it's huge.
Reason. It's huge, right? And then there's that blue horse. When you come in and out.
You heard the story of that horse. It fell on the architect and killed him.
Yeah, the guy who designed it. Yeah, like it killed him. It fell on his leg, and he bled out. And it's horrifying. I mean, that who's that guy? Luis Jimenez is the name of the sculptor, and his work is all over El Paso. I think that's where he's from. So I've seen his work everywhere, and most of it's fine, normal, and that one for some reason is just terrifying.
They say the Denver airport has been constructed for any kind of earth emergency. They would need to put the government leaders underground. Do you think it's out there?
Sure. Why not? I mean, that seems a weird place to put them, though, right? Like, wouldn't you put them near D.C. or something? I mean,
they're the source of power, you would think.
Yeah, right. It is huge. It does ask a lot of questions when you're out there. You're just sort of I went there for a weekend, and I had a flight in the afternoon, and I purposely got there as early as I could so I could just kind of go through security and loiter around and, not draw the attention of anybody because I wasn't doing anything wrong, but I just kind of wanted to kind of experience it. And you're right. It's huge. It goes on forever. It doesn't seem to need that much space, and all these sort of kind of minor, maybe, architectural decisions all sort of add up, and you start to wonder, is there something really going on here beneath the surface? Maybe, maybe not.
We had a congressional hearing today on UAPs. I call them UFOs now, of course. And a lot of people are still suspicious of government, Colin, with respect to hiding information. What do you think of that?
It's interesting. I listened to a lot of that. I've been following that story. That guy, he keeps saying, I can't say anything publicly because it's all classified, which might be true. It made me think of this book, Donald Kehoe's UFOs Are Real from 1950.
Way back.
Yeah, and he had a bunch of guys, also, Air Force pilots and other guys who said, we've seen stuff. And I mean, we've been seeing this story of a guy coming forward and saying he's seen stuff. We've been seeing it for decades. A lot of people I think are acting like this guy. What is the name? Grutch. Like he is, the first guy who's ever done this. But we've got these guys. We've had these guys on record for a long time, and it seems interesting that we keep kind of getting that same story without anything really coming from it.
Why is there so much distrust, and it goes all the way back to the beginning of government?
Yeah, it's weird. In the beginning, when you see kind of fear of secret groups, whether or not it's the Freemasons or the Illuminati or the Catholics or whomever, it's always like people are always worried about government being attacked from the outside. That it's foreign influences, it's French revolutionaries, or it's the Pope, and they're going to undermine our great democratic system. We're the first democracy. We've got it all worked out, and so we're deeply paranoid that somebody's going to come in from a foreign power and undermine America, and that shifts by the post-World War II. Suddenly, it's the government who is the conspirator, the government who's out to get us. The government we stop trusting, and I think that's a weird, fascinating shift that we went from thinking that the government needed to be protected from conspirators to thinking that the government, is itself the main conspirator.
What is a secret society to you?
To me, I think of a secret society in two ways. I think there are literal groups like the Freemasons. I think that's a pretty straightforward secret society. And these guys either are doing something nefarious or not. I think of like Nixon's cronies as a secret society doing something nefarious, kind of working, conspiratorially to break laws. There's this other kind of secret society which I think we think of as like a much more kind of nebulous and ambiguous and wide-reaching. Like when you talk to people about the Illuminati, it's like, they're capable of doing anything. They're everywhere and anywhere. They're almost kind of magical or supernatural in their ability to sort of reach out and affect everything. And I think we have these kind of two parallel versions of secret societies, one which is kind of grounded in history and one which is maybe a little bit more supernatural, I think.
You've written other books, Ghostland and American History and Haunted Places, The Unidentified, about those monsters. This one, are they all still available?
Oh yeah, they're all out there wherever books are sold. You can get them on Amazon. You can get them at your local bookstore. So yeah.
How did you get involved in all this, Colin?
I think I got involved with this basically from growing up next to the Winchester Mystery House when I was a kid. You mentioned this before. This is kind of one of the most haunted houses in the country. It's so beautiful and strange. And I think growing up as a suburban kid who just, thought the suburbs were pretty boring, here was this crazy house in the middle of nowhere. And it kind of got me thinking about ghosts. And, I wrote this book about, why, like the history behind some of these haunted houses. And from there, I wanted to understand, what comes after ghosts? Well, probably Bigfoot, this kind of, things that are hiding out in the trees or on the top of the Himalayas or, in lakes. And so I've kind of just been looking for these hidden places, hidden groups, hidden monsters, hidden ghosts, anything that seems sort of invisible, but yet is still kind of lurking at the margins. I want to go see what's there and see what's really happening.
What do you think of Bigfoot, real or otherwise?
I would like to have thought that if Bigfoot was real, we would have a little bit more evidence now. I think growing up as a kid that you'd see that famous film, the Gimlin-Patterson one, where
classic.
And I remember just as a kid just thinking, wow, that's got to be real. That's got to be out there. It looks so cool, the kind of grainy photos and the shaky footage. But now it's like we've all got phones in our pockets. We've all got great videos. We've all how come the more recording devices we have on hand, the harder it is to get this guy on film. It does kind of raise the bar for believability for me.
It's perplexing to be sure. Do we have a lot of secret societies today?
We certainly have a fair amount, but I think people are really sort of worried that there are kind of darker, nebulous ones that I couldn't quite figure out. I feel like there's definitely things like Skull and Bones in Yale and a bunch of other places, and those are definitely for real. And then there are other things I think about. There's like Satanists hiding out there. I couldn't find any evidence of that. So we've got some that are real, and how much damage they're doing, I don't know. And we've got other ones that are a little bit more fantastical that I think maybe are kind of, just kind of in people's heads maybe.
Did you stumble across the Knights Templar, or was that too far back?
That they don't seem to have a big presence in the United States. They're more of a kind of European group, as far as I could tell. So so some of those guys I stayed away from. The Order of the Golden Dawn and the Knights Templar and stuff like that. I figured I wanted to just kind of focus on America itself and sort of leave Europe to maybe a European scholar who maybe would know a little bit more.
Tell us a story about that shampoo maker.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So Dr. Bronner, he shows up in this. Like, I wasn't expecting him at all, but you know the Dr. Bronner shampoo. It's like 18-in-1. You can use it as toothpaste and on your hair and all sorts of other stuff. He got his start. He's an immigrant from Germany. His original name was Heilbronner, which he chopped off the Heil because he thought that was a little too reminiscent of the Nazis. Although he himself was his family was actually persecuted. He didn't have any dealings with the Nazis himself, but he made a name for himself by arguing that fluoride in the water and toothpaste was a communist plot, like straight out of Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. That I'd always thought when I was a kid and I saw Dr. Strangelove, I always thought that was just some weird joke and the satire. But Dr. Bronner was one of the many people at the time who was arguing that fluoride was in our water because the communists had put it there to enact some sort of mind control. So I was not expecting to see him show up, but there he was. He eventually moved on to making shampoo and kind of left that part of his life behind, I guess.
Well, my jury's out about fluoride in the water, to be sure, but I'm not so sure the communists put it in there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people who are skeptical of fluoride in general, but I think even the people who are skeptical of fluoride, at the time they were like, you guys should really stop talking about that communist stuff because it's not winning us any converts, and you just make us all look a little crazy.
Let's take some calls. Let's go to Gary in Pennsylvania, east of the Rockies, to get us started. Hello, Gary.
Hi, George. Thank you for taking my call. I just have a comment and a question for your guest.
Sure.
My comment is about Thomas, the great Thomas Paine. He came here from England in 1775. From what I've read, Benjamin Franklin talked him to coming here, but within 14 years, he was a spark behind the American Revolution and later the French Revolution. And from what I've read, he wanted to have slavery abolished and give women the right to vote in the Constitution. Then he'd go for it. Then he was locked up over in France for years. But why, in your research, did he belong to these secret societies? And why was he so excoriated? And he's like a footnote in history. You don't even hear about him. Okay, thank you for taking my call, George.
All right, thank you. What do you know about Thomas Paine, Colin?
Yeah, you're right, Gary. Yeah, he definitely was, I think from our modern perspective, a kind of more progressive guy and kind of maybe out of step with his time. People weren't kind of ready for those ideas, and maybe that's why they treated him as a little bit more dangerous. I don't know that, like, he was a big player in the Freemasons or any of these other conspiracy theories. I think that, he just was kind of one of these guys who just had these ideas. And that is the thing I learned is that, the Freemasons, when they started in England, they had this whole their meetings were secret, and as such, it allowed them to discuss things that maybe were considered a little taboo or dangerous. Things like, atheism or democracy or women's rights or whatever. They could do that in secret without worrying about, the king or whomever clamping down on them. And that's kind of how they got that reputation, even if the stuff they were discussing from our perspective maybe seems, kind of pretty middle of the road.
Next up, Catherine's with us in British Columbia, Canada. Hello, Kath. Go ahead.
Hi, George.
Good to have you with us.
Hi, Colin. Oh, thank you. Colin, I wanted to ask you about Church of Scientology, because I hear all this stuff, Tom Cruise and all this kind of stuff. So I just wanted to see what kind of rabbit hole you went down on that. If you did.
If you did.
Stuff. Yeah.
I didn't get into Scientology in this book only because I thought it would take a whole other book. There's so much there. You know, I used to live in LA, and I remember when I first moved to LA, going out to lunch with somebody and, you know, casually mentioned Scientology, and her eyes just got wide, and she just kind of shushed me, and she pointed over my shoulder, and there was one of those Scientology buildings just sort of looming as though, you know, there would be somebody on the top floor with binoculars watching us. And there's a kind of, there's a lot there. And I know there's been some books about people who have left, you know, and their experience. And unfortunately, I just felt like there was just so much there that I couldn't quite get it in there. Maybe a future book. I wish I had more for you on that, unfortunately.
Colin, are the Moonies still around?
I don't think the Moonies are around. There are different other little crazy religious cults that have sprung up. There's that one in Pennsylvania where they all have automatic rifles, and they do all their worship service all, you know, decked out in, you know, AR-15s and stuff like that. They're not Moonies, but I think they're kind of a vague offshoot of them. And when I lived upstate New York, there was this cult that was buying up a bunch of property around me. They eventually, I think they were based out of San Francisco or something like that. I forgot their name, but they're sort of slowly expanding here. So yeah, we've still got these crazy cults in various forms, and they're, you know, trying to spread their influence using the internet and stuff like that. You kind of see them pop up all over the place.
Did you do anything about the Salem witch trials or anything like that?
I mean, that's like our first great conspiracy theory, right? You know,
yep.
That's like from the very beginning, this idea that your neighbor, who just looks like your stand-up Puritan, just like everybody else, it turns out, you know, she's in league with the devil, and even though she seems like just a kind old woman, she's actually working behind the scenes doing her magic to undermine you. And so like, you know, the Salem witch trial is kind of the first great American paranoia. And one of the things that came out of it, Cotton Mather's book, which is called Wonders of the Invisible World. I think that's such a cool title, and it's something I think that runs through the book as a whole, this idea that, you know, there's this whole invisible world populated with these people, and not just these people. I mean, you know, other books like that I've done where, you know, the invisible world includes ghosts or UFOs, and there's these kind of wonders that we're always sort of feeling the presence of, even if we can't ever put our fingers on them.
What's been the reaction to your book, Under the Eye of Power?
It's been really fascinating. I mean, I think, you know, like what I wanted to kind of suggest is that this stuff, our belief that there's you know, these secret societies operate in the margin is not a fringe belief. It's not something that just belongs to, you know, a small segment of the population. It's actually something that a lot of us believe, and it has a lot of influence on our day-to-day events. And so I think some people aren't maybe ready for that, and so they kind of don't like to hear that. But I think, you know, other people are kind of finding it, and it's been fun to talk to people about, you know, what their experience is and what their beliefs are, and sort of how that matches up with the kind of long history of the United States and these various things that have evolved over time.
It's fascinating, the research you've done. I mean, did you encounter any problems?
This was a hard one to research because I wrote it in 2020 and 2021, and so when I normally like to go to libraries, I like to go to places, I like to, you know, dig into the archives, and I couldn't do any of that because everything was on lockdown. And so the main problem I had was figuring out how I could research all this stuff without, you know, leaving my apartment because I was trapped inside. And then when I finally, you know, was able to travel again in 2021, I, you know, kind of ran across the country on a panic deadline trying to see as many places as possible. So that was an unusual writing process.
Well, you did a good job. What's your next project?
Oh, I'm still trying to figure that out. I don't know if people out there have ideas, but you know, I've been sort of thinking about magic generally, thinking about cults. I think those are two good ones. Maybe I'll go back to the Scientology. We'll kind of have to see what happens next, I guess.
How did you like your book on Ghostland?
That was one of the most fun books to research, I got to say. That was, you know, just going to New Orleans and Detroit and Salem and getting to go to all these places and taking tours and talking to people about these, you know, cool, weird places. And I had the most fun doing that, going out late, doing ghost hunts with people and just having a grand time.
Back to the calls. Danny's with us in Oklahoma. Welcome to the program. Hi, Danny. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks, George.
Thank you.
Yeah, very interesting stories. And I'll tell you that one about the Pinkertons a while ago, that I didn't even know about them. I'm going to have to study up on that. But you know who scares me more than the World Economic Forum with that Klaus Schwab? When he makes a statement like he did, in plain sight, no less, that you will own nothing someday, but you'll be happy. And he thinks that we're all naive enough to to go along with that. But the organization that I'd like your guests' take on is the Council on Foreign Relations, because I find that time and time again, so many sources, let's just say, avoid talking about them.
Yeah,
and
they
yet,
do.
as you probably know, several past administrations, both Republican and Democrat, filled their whole administration with people, high-level positions, that are members of this organization. And a lot of the things that the CFR pushes are anti-American, at least in my opinion. And yet they eventually, many of their policies, domestic and foreign, eventually become reality. And they're not good for our country. So I don't, and here's what I'd finally say on that. Can we get the moderators, whenever we have debates next summer, but with both parties, when they start debating each other, can we get a moderator to ask that question, will you avoid appointing people that belong to the Council on Foreign Relations? Will you make that pledge?
Which is interesting because so many belong. Have you investigated that organization at all, Colin?
I think that's such a common thread through our whole history. Yeah, these groups that are, as your caller says, just sort of in plain sight, but they're mixed in with government. They seem to have this kind of outsized effect. I think you're right that it doesn't seem very healthy for democracy. I think you're also right. Your caller's sort of saying we really have to get more involved. I think a lot of times you read about these things and you kind of they seem so all powerful. It seems so like the deck stacked against you. It's maybe not even worth trying. But you're right. You got to participate. You got to make your voice heard. You got to get in touch with the journalists who are in charge of these debates and are interviewing these people and kind of make your voices known. I think that's the only way you deal with these kind of these groups that are kind of have their thumb on the scale is making sure that everybody is not checked out and not just sort of given up and really trying to actually get back in there and make sure that politicians, Democrats, Republicans, whoever, are answering to the people and not whoever's writing them the checks.
Colin, would you say generally that the secret societies are good or bad?
I was really surprised when I wrote this book, because I sort of thought of them mostly as bad. But as I mentioned at one point a little earlier, like one of the groups that I think fits the bill of a secret society is the Underground Railroad, who were violating the Fugitive Slave Act and getting enslaved people out to freedom. And I think that's pretty good. I think that there was a group that in 1970. I also wrote about this, who broke into a field office, the FBI field office in Media, Pennsylvania, this small town, tiny little field office. And this group of 8 people broke in and stole, tens of thousands of pages of classified FBI documents. And that's how we learned about, the project known as COINTELPRO, which was the FBI spying on, civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., as well as activists and other people. And we wouldn't have known about that if this little secret society of 8 people hadn't broken in and taken these files. So I think a lot of times they're bad. I think it's bad when you've got a group of people who don't feel that they answer to anybody but themselves, and they aren't transparent, and they start mucking around in democracy. But every so often, I think you find a group that is actually motivated to do something good and just, and if they work in secret, maybe that's okay too.
Let's go to Ruth in Maryland. Welcome to the show. Hello, Ruthie.
Hi, thank you, George and
Sure.
Colin, for taking my call. And I just had one question. I wanted to know if you've ever heard of the Knights of the Golden Circle, and do they still exist? I saw a long time ago on the History Channel, they mentioned it was either Jesse James or John Wilkes Booth, or maybe both of them that were in that group. And I just wanted to know if you've ever heard of that.
The Knights of the Golden Circle, Colin.
Knights of the Golden Circle. No, I don't think they exist anymore. I think you're right. That was a kind of brief 19th century flourish, and they flared out back in the 19th century. The other cool group that I found that you might be interested in that I wrote about was let's see if I can get this right, the Knights of the Invisible Jungle of the Tiger's Eye.
That's what they called themselves?
Yeah. It was like the organization got together and every member got to add a word to the title, and they all jumbled it together. This group. It's really hard to find anything about these guys, but in the 1920s, when the Ku Klux Klan was back in business and they were, threatening people and just, doing all this sorts of violence again, this group that called themselves the Knights of the Invisible Jungle of the Tiger's Eye decided they were going to be a kind of anti-Ku Klux Klan, this sort of secret group that was going to fight back against the Klan. So instead of white robes, they had black robes. And they, so it's not clear that they did much, but they kind of had a press release. They released some photos of it. You can find these photos of these guys in these black robes, and a kind of announcement that they're going to be working behind the scenes to fight the Ku Klux Klan. But I couldn't. It's very hard to find any tangible proof of this. This may have just been a kind of one-off. But I think they get points for the weirdest name of any secret society that I've ever come across.
In Albany, New York, we've got Steve. Welcome to the show. Hey, Stephen.
Good morning, George. It's Steve from Albany, New York.
Our cab driver.
Yes. And I want to ask him about Nexium. One night I had a passenger in my car, a fare, who said, drop me off at such and such place. So I drove him up to where he had to go, and he gets out, and he goes, see that house there? I go, yeah. He goes, that's Nexium right there. And they were an oddball group, if you ask me. And I don't know how they got as far as they did, but I want to know what he has to say about them.
Nexium. You ever heard of them, Colin?
Yeah, that's crazy that you were that close to that house. I mean, yeah, it's one of those cults that got in the news for basically coercing mostly young women into doing kind of terrible things against their will. And that's such a terrible kind of recurring narrative in the United States. I mean, Manson family may be the most obvious, but these are all over the place. There's one in San Diego called the Temple of Love for a while, and I can tell you that one of the ways they work is really fascinating. It's called love bombing. I don't know if you guys have ever heard this term.
Love bombing?
Love bombing. It's the same thing actually that fraternities use during Pledge Week, where you
like hazing
people. Yeah, well, so what you do. I'm not suggesting anybody do this, but you keep somebody up, you keep them awake for hours, you exhaust them physically and mentally, and then you kind of break them down emotionally so they just feel like garbage.
They're like incoherent or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then at the very end of it, you do this 180, and that's where the love bombing come in, and you sort of jump on them and say, but we're your true friends. We're the only ones that care about you. We'll protect you and love you. And that's how cults work to get people in. Scientologists use this as well. It's you start by kind of breaking somebody down emotionally and physically, and then you sort of offer them false sense of community and kinship, and you can manipulate people a lot that way. And I know Nexium used that. I know Scientologists use that. And I guess if you find yourself in that position, you should watch out, and you should probably get out of there ASAP.
And Nexium was a drug they took off the market as well, wasn't it?
I think that's a different Nexium. This one was spelled really weird. It's like NXVUM or something. It was pronounced Nexium, but it was and they got people to tattoo things on their skin and all sorts of weird stuff.
Next up, let's go to Austin in Wisconsin. First time caller. Hi, Austin. Thank you for calling.
Hey, thanks for having me. How are you doing?
Okay, how about you?
Can't complain. Hey, I just, the other day I was having a conversation with my dad about some of the dirty politics and whatnot going on in our country, and I had mentioned to him about the group the Illuminati. And I was stunned when he told me he knew nothing about it. He apparently never heard of it. And I didn't really know where to point him to get any real information on it. I know I'd read a book a couple years back that kind of outlined about the whole underground cabal and wealthy elite kind of pulling the strings in multiple governments around the globe. And unfortunately can't remember the author and name of that book. And I'm just wondering if you can maybe outline a couple key points about them and maybe give me an idea of some resources that I could find some actual, legitimate information about that group.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, definitely. The Illuminati is a big part of the book that I wrote, and I guess I would recommend my own book, if you want resources. But what I can tell you is that the Illuminati are founded in Bavaria, Germany, in the 1770s, and it's a group of people who are aristocrats who are interested in kind of dangerous thoughts. They're interested in things like democracy and birth control and women's rights and stuff like that, and it freaks out the Bavarian authorities. So when they get wind of this, they raid the offices and they shut down the Illuminati, and that is the end of the Bavarian Illuminati. They barely last 10 years. But they appear to have a really good PR team, because even though the original Bavarian Illuminati didn't last very long, as you mentioned, they're still on the tip of everybody's tongue. Basically, the thing that I found really fascinating is what starts the rumors and the whispers is this idea that when the French Revolution goes crazy, everybody's kind of looking around and saying, how did things get so violent? How did things get so bloody? And that's when people start to suggest, well, maybe this Bavarian group that supposedly died out 20 years ago is in fact still around, and maybe they had a hand in this, because people just can't quite believe that the French Revolution gets so crazy just of its own accord, and so they start looking for a kind of hidden hand, and that's the beginning of the belief that somehow the Illuminati are working behind the scenes for reasons unknown with some nefarious, malevolent plot, and that is still with us today, some 200 years later.
Colin, how would you categorize conspiracy theories with all this?
I think that I looked at some actual conspiracies, like Watergate or Iran-Contra. And one of the things I found that I guess I would suggest to your listeners is when you have a theory about a conspiracy, there's usually some truth there. The world is pretty corrupt. It's pretty terrible. But once you start looking into things, when you think about Watergate, you think about Woodward and Bernstein. They found evidence pretty quickly. People started to talk. A conspiracy takes a lot of people to manage it, right? It's not just the guys in pinstripe suits who are making all the decisions behind the scenes. You also need secretaries. You need hitmen. You need all the players, and maybe not all of them are as ideologically committed as the top guys. And that's what happened with Watergate, right? It wasn't Nixon who spilled the beans. It was like the secretaries who were willing to talk to reporters. So I'm always just asking that question. If it's a big conspiracy, it's got to take a lot of people, and if it's taken that many people, it seems like somebody's going to spill the beans.
Yeah, somebody will get it out. Colin, thanks for being on the program again. Keep in touch with us.
Chris Milligan is a writer, researcher, and publisher for Trine Day Books. Your company seems to specialize in what you call suppressed topics. Do you mean literally suppressed topics that nobody else would publish, or that the government has tried to sit on or stifle?
Absolutely. It literally blew my mind, you might say. A friend of mine, I was running an email list, and a friend of mine on there, been an executive producer of a show, aired internationally on NBC, and he had a book with an agent for 2 years in New York, and he was decrying that nobody would publish his book. And after hearing that a couple of times, I says, well, I've got a computer on my desk. They tell me I can make a book. And then I helped him make a book. And then my friend, Professor Anthony Sutton, his book, America's Secret Establishment, was going out of print. And I said, Anthony, we can't do that. It's never been in hardback. It's never been in libraries. We need to do something. And so I went and borrowed $5,000 and started a publishing company. And 3 weeks after I had it out, Anthony died. But I put it out anyway and put out a little book about Vietnam. And just by standing up, I had authors throwing books at me that were amazing books. And the reason why they weren't getting printed because they followed certain subjects that were being suppressed, and New York just was not publishing them, so I started publishing them.
Tell me this: do you vet all the books? I looked at the list of the things you published. It's wide ranging, that's for sure. Do you vet this stuff? Do you stand by it, or you're just publishing it and letting people decide?
Oh no, absolutely. We vet it. We go through editing, and I turn down a lot more than we publish. And no, we vet some of it. Some of it takes us 2 years before we get the book out because we take a long time in looking at it.
How do you deal with the inevitable label of you as a conspiracy nut? Well, you'll put out anything that's crazy enough or that slams the government. You're just a conspiracy nut, which, is the kind of label that we get here at Coast as well as a way to marginalize the information that comes out.
I don't know. I've been dealing with it for a long time. Live up here at Oregon just kind of goes off your back, because when you look at, I first heard some things from my father, okay, and it was very serious. He took me in a little room and with a professor and sat me down and told me some things, and, I didn't understand him, okay, but, I looked into it, and the more you look into it, you find validation for what there's there, and then once you see the seriousness of the situation, if we don't do something now, our children won't be able to because they'll be completely locked down in a big brother state. And
well, let's talk about what your father told you. You mentioned it, actually. I noticed it was in the foreword to the book that we're talking about later tonight, An American in the Basement. You mentioned about the conversation you had. Tell me a little bit more about your dad's background, why he was in a position to know what he told you and what it is he said.
Well, he got involved in intelligence as an 18-year-old kid as an exchange student to the University of Shanghai in China in the 30s. And then the war came along, and in 1940, he was in COI, which was Donovan's first organization, then OSS. Then he got sheep-dipped, got put into G2, and got into deep politics. And then from there, from World War II, he went through a couple alphas and was in CIA at his beginning. Then he went, like you said earlier, his last overt job was branch chief, head of all of East Asia. And then he went covert for a while. And then I was a little kid. He was supposedly a advertising salesman and part-time speechwriter. And he went to Southeast Asia they told us he was going to write a book on the church in Southeast Asia. And he never wrote it. And when he came back, things really changed. I was just a little kid, but we'd been living at this house for a long time. They had plans to build things there, and then all of a sudden the house got put up for sale. We were going to move to Rochester, New York, and then all of a sudden we were going to move to Rochester, Minnesota. We went out and bought, big winter coats, and then all of a sudden we didn't do anything, and the house sold. We moved to another little new subdivision in Fairfax outside D.C., and then all of a sudden we were there for about a year and a half, and then my dad was appointed to be a vice president of a college. And we moved to Tennessee, and we were there for a couple of years, and the president resigned. They asked my dad to be president. He said no and moved the whole family out to Oregon. This was 1959. I was 10 years old, just what do? You follow the family, right? And then later on in the late 60s, he asked me what I thought of the Vietnam War, and I gave him a flip little answer as a teenager. I says, well, you've got a sack of hand grenades, and you've got some rice patties. You go throw the hand grenades, and went for the good guys wearing the white hats, Been raised on John Wayne in World War II. And just gave him a flip answer, and he said we had to have a talk. And then, a couple of years later almost, I finally figured out the date of the talk. It was the day before my 20th birthday. And there was this professor from Vanderbilt in town, Professor D.F. Fleming, and my dad took me in my little brother's room and said, he opened his mouth and said, the Vietnam War is about drugs. There's these secret societies behind it. And I'm thinking, Dad, okay, you're talking about the mafia. And then he says, and communism's all a sham. These same secret societies are behind it all. It's all a big game. And at that point in time, I think my dad's absolutely nuts, and I'm a teenager, and I know a heck of a lot more than he does. And it's the late 60s, and I'm growing my hair long, and I'm smoking a little marijuana. And I'm thinking, my dad's having the drug talk with me, because he hadn't had the sex talk with me. I was married and had a little kid, and I was almost 20. So I get to, I'm straightening up, and I'm going to say, yes, sir, I'm waiting for my dad to tell me to stop smoking pot. And he doesn't do that. He continues to tell me about his intelligence career and tells me that they're playing out a loose scenario in Vietnam, and tells me, starts talking to me about psychological warfare and stuff. And after a while, it becomes fairly apparent that I have no idea of what they're talking about, and I have no frame of reference. And so I had some other conversations with my father and some arguments, and one thing he told me, he says they're out to opiate your whole generation. And it just didn't make a lot of sense to me.
Did he tell you not to tell anybody?
No, he didn't. He didn't tell me not to. He told me that when he had signed up in the 30s, the thing that he had signed said that he couldn't talk for 10 years. And he said that when he had moved the whole family out there after he had turned down to be president of this college, because, as a kid, it was very interesting because we moved to this, and he became a college student. And then pretty soon we didn't have the income, and he had to, he soon started teaching junior high school. So he went from a vice president of a college to being a college student to teaching. And no, he didn't tell me not to tell anybody. But it was interesting. I a little bit later on, just back to your question, I went and told some people some things of what my father said. And they looked at me, and this was in the early 70s, and they said, well, gosh, you're a conspiracy theorist. And I kind of scratched my head and said, what's a conspiracy theorist? And so I took conspiracy theory on as an intellectual discipline, and to study it, to see what it meant. And it was very interesting because I would go into, I've always been a voracious reader, and I would go into every bookstore I could find. I would say, take me to your conspiracy section. And all of them had at least one book. Okay, and after starting reading these books, I said, gosh, some of these are almost formula books designed to divide and conquer us, to make us, because I can find you a book that blames it all on the Jews. I can find you a book that blames it all on the Catholics. I can find you a book that blames it all on the hippies. I can find you a book that blames it all on the Mormons. What do you want? And so it's because, one thing, a conspiracy theory doesn't have to be true to be effective. And every day, all of us make decisions based upon somebody or our own conspiracy theory. So as much as they poo-poo it, conspiracy theory is used all the time.
Is there a point at which that conversation with dear old Dad came back to you, that the light sort of goes on, and you realize not only is conspiracy theory interesting in itself, but some of this stuff is true?
I was 8 years old when Kennedy was shot, and it never sat right with me. So I'd always be, reading about that. And there in the late 60s and early 70s, there was a lot of stories about the Kennedy assassination. And then they started to have stories about what my dad told me, CIA drugs, in the girly magazines. And I was reading one of these, Gallery or Penthouse, something like that, and some story, and it was talking about the Kennedy assassination. And they were talking about all the different theories of, CIA, mafia, blah, blah. And there was a little throwaway line, and then they say, and some people talk about the involvement of secret societies. And that brought back the conversation that I'd had with my dad. And I really started to think about it, because when he first told me, he just told me, and, it sat there in my head, and, I got to think about it. But when I read that, it really brought it back, and that's when I really started to investigate it. And, one way I investigate is I'll get a book and read it, and go to the bibliography and go to those books and read it. And pretty soon you're out of, tomes on conspiracy theory, and you're into dusty tomes about banking and intelligence services and stuff like that, and secret societies. And finding information out about secret societies, especially the Order of Skull and Bones, was very, very hard until I came across Professor Sutton's work.
Let's start with a general kind of a statement from you about whether or not you're encouraged or discouraged by sort of that litany that I mentioned in the introduction to this, the NSA scandal and all the other ones that seem to be unfolding around us. On one hand, I guess it's encouraging that we're getting a peek behind the curtain. On the other, wow, there's a lot of bad stuff going on.
Absolutely, and I was listening to your thing. I said, boy, that's a lot of. But you talked about the optimism at the beginning, and yes, I'm very, very optimistic, because I see a lot of good things happening. And when I first started to delve into this, the ability of the intelligence agencies and these forces behind the shadows to control information and to control bureaucracies was much tighter. And so, yes, I'm very, very encouraged that I think very good things are going to happen, because a lot of things, they're two-edged swords. I mean, the technology is here, and obviously we could, enter to a very dark age of a very big brother, manipulation. There's so much time and effort that's spent on subjugating us, and if just a little bit was spent on having a very good life on this amazing blue ball that's spinning through space, that there's not very many. And I think we're coming to the realization that we don't need to be all this fighting going on.
Let's take a couple of examples, because this is the business you're in. You put out books that expose conspiracies, secret societies, secrets, things of that sort. What do you think about Edward Snowden? There's a lot of people see him as an absolute traitor to his country. He signed a secrecy oath. He violated it. Now he's in Russia, which is not exactly it might be a good move for him legally, but not a very good move PR-wise.
Well, I really don't know, because, all I see is what I get from the mainstream media, and I found the mainstream media to be very suspect. And they're very sophisticated psychological warfare games that are going on. Part of the shtick of these people in the shadows is to make us think that we shouldn't have a government, that government is bad. We first had our first anti-Illuminati scare in the late 1700s. People went to George Washington and talked to him about them. And he says, yes, they're here. Their tenets are diabolical. And what they're after is to divorce us from our institutions, okay, our family, our faith, and government, because we need government. Now, here's how the secret societies run the world. And basically, they're using America as a cat's paw, as a tool, okay? And the secret societies run the world. It's a leviathan of 3 levels, and each level has 3 parts, okay? The top level is mining, metal, and money. And, you think about it, and it kind of makes sense, And when I look at the families at Skull and Bones, I find all these mining families and all these mining engineers, okay? And I watch some of their machinations of taking over mining companies, okay? And then
is mining under mining? Do you include oil as a general generic?
Level, okay. The next level is drugs, guns, and oil.
Okay.
And it was a guy from Skull and Bones in 1855 that took petroleum, rock oil, and first made gasoline. And he said, gee, gentlemen, I think you have something here with a very inexpensive process. You have some very valuable products. Soon the Pennsylvania Rock Oil Company, who he wrote that report for, was passed into hands of investors in New Haven, Connecticut, where Skull and Bones was based. The people who started the Pennsylvania Rock Oil Company soon had their very sons at Yale in the Order of Skull and Bones. Rockefellers are members of the Order of Skull and Bones. They're a member of there's a Rockefeller in every secret society at Yale. There's 7 of them that I can get my hands on their membership list. And then they've been involved with the drug smuggling ever since basic drug smuggling, modern drug smuggling started in the 1700s, and then arms. They're very much in the forefront of a lot of the arms dealers, and you find them selling arms to both sides at the wars, and also involved in the armistice talks. And then the last level, where it hits the road, is media. Okay. Movies / music, because they need to control the culture. And then the very last thing is quote-unquote magic, okay, where because the ability to hoodwink us, to make us think that something else is going on. And then their preponderance on using mass trauma in this psychological warfare, because basically what's going on, okay, is these forces out of the shadows, and there was a bit of public discussion about this in the late 1800s, about whether we were going to be an empire or a republic. Well, the powers in the shadows took us to being to being an empire, but they didn't tell the people. I mean, we still put our hand over our heart and pledge allegiance to the republic. Well, what they're doing is they're using these psychological games and generational politics, okay, to move us from being free individual citizens of a republic to being slaves of an empire.
Well, I mean, there's no argument there. It sounded to me like you were saying that these forces, those 3 levels, are in favor of less government, and I always had the impression they're in favor of more of it. When you look at the support for the NSA and the kind of surveillance that's been underway for years, that seems like a lot more government and intrusion into our lives and less personal liberty, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. And actually moving us away from civil government to corporate governance.
Right.
And again, it's an empire.
I want to come back to Skull and Bones in a minute, but before we leave this and Snowden thing, and if you don't want to talk about it, it's fine, but I'm just trying to figure it out in my own head, because I'm bothered by some of it. The guy does sign this security oath and then spills it. I welcome the fact that he spilled this secret, but I'm trying to figure out what is the big secret that he spilled, because is there anybody in the country, in the world, is there any government in the world that did not already know NSA was spying on all of us, that it had the ability to basically intercept every email, every phone call, store it all on giant computers? I mean, I think we've assumed that for a long time, in part because of other guests we've had over the years on this program and probably other books that your company has published.
Well, yes, and again, it goes back to, I mean, this story is getting play all over the media.
Sure.
And, we have a book by Daniel Estlin, and it's called Deconstructing WikiLeaks. And one thing he goes in there and he shows that, Mr. Assange mostly has done the bidding of the Western intelligence agencies. I mean, and when he comes with it out, who's his partners? The New York Times and The Economist. These are people that regularly attend the Bilderberg meetings that don't tell us anything about it. Okay, so when we brought that book out, people ran the other way because people need heroes. I mean, we need heroes. It's a dark time. I mean, we're being assaulted on all kinds of things. Who knows what the future holds, blah, blah, blah. So we need heroes, and people hate to hear something that this guy maybe, is not a hero or is being used. And a lot of people, they get played, and then if they're assets, if they're just, assets at the end of the trail, then they just get dropped and get twisted in the wind. And again, it goes back to it's being played big in the media. I mean, you're going to have later on Miss Yarsinski. I mean, she's an amazing journalist. She has over 55 books out, okay? When she first told this story about Scott Spiker, I mean, the book came out from a major New York publisher. Well, she's a very dogged investigator and very courageous. And she finally, got the story down to the end. Well, New York wouldn't publish it. I mean, the lady has 55 books out. She has a lot of contacts in the publishing firm. I mean, she had to reach out to me to get the book published. This is, one of the things where we stand up and are doing our suppressed works because, books are very important. There's a reason why, quote unquote, they burn books. Okay, because when you can hand somebody, somebody's thought in this thing that you can hold between your hands, it's a very powerful thing.
Just seems to me that Snowden's real crime is humiliating U.S. government by confirming what probably everybody, all intelligence agencies in the world already knew or suspected,
right,
confirming that we've been spying on everybody.
Right, and they've come out and told us that directly, and the gentleman who created the NASA, the NSA network, told us completely how it worked a couple of years ago. And I go back to, Amy has this amazing story, and we can't get any press about it all. I mean, I've got a PR firm. We've sent out all kinds of notices and stuff like that. We get some radio interviews, but I can't get it in the newspaper. I mean, we do a book by a gal who's the girlfriend of Lee Harvey Oswald. I mean, it was verified by 60 Minutes. Okay, the guy who started 60 Minutes, we have him on videotape. He tried to break the story. The door was slammed shut on him from the people up above him,
I interviewed her on this show.
Right, if 60 Minutes can't break the story, okay, that tells me that something's going on there in the media that's blocking, and they're doing it for a reason, and a lot of it has to do with the psychological warfare. And, you see, getting back to one thing my father told me, he says, they're out to opiate your whole generation. Okay, and one thing that they were looking to do is the baby boomers, which I was right in the middle of, they were looking to create a drugged-out peace generation. Okay, they didn't want us talking to our parents. They wanted us to be an antithesis, okay, to our parents, so that then they could scare people in the suburbs and everywhere, so they could start the drug war and this assault on our Constitution. Okay, and then us. The boomers weren't supposed to cohese as a generation. And there's a very good book called Generation, A History of America's Future. I strongly recommend people read it because it has a lot to do with the dynamics of what's going on.
You think Snowden, somebody will take him out, if you had to guess?
I don't know. I mean, he's a useful person right now because it's generating, some talk about it. I mean, is this there's people that talk about in psychological warfare. You have a revealment process. Okay, I mean, it's Big Brother is here, right? I mean, and so this is kind of a revealment process of us because I mean, us as individuals. I mean, what can we do? As an individual person, because a lot of the psychological warfare, part of it is to get us to think that all we are is we're in it all on our own. We don't have government with us. We don't have our family with us. We don't have faith with us. I don't know if it's part of a revealment process or something, but I tend not to trust things that get talked a lot about in the media because in our books we bring some very revelatory things. And we have the media actively fight us and actively cover up what we are talking about in the books.
Are you familiar with the Michael Hastings story at all?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
If the listeners don't know, I mean, he's the guy that broke these stories about some skullduggery in Afghanistan. General McChrystal led to him being removed from his command in Afghanistan, and Michael Hastings created a lot of enemies, of course. He had been telling his friends and colleagues in recent days that he was working on something very hot, something involving this lady, Jill Kelly, that socialite in Florida, who got chummy with a lot of intelligence and military folks, her relationship to the Department of Defense. Well, Michael Hastings, as we read earlier this week, died in this high-speed crash, single-vehicle crash in Southern California, 4:20 in the morning. People wondering whether he was killed somehow. Somebody took remote control of his vehicle and smashed it into a tree, or what the heck was going on? Any thoughts?
Well, looking into this stuff sometimes isn't good for people's health. I mean, you have Jim Keith, you have William Cooper, you have Danny Casolaro. You have a lot of people that have looked into things such as this and have met untimely demise.
You mentioned about the drug traffic. The guy at the San Jose Mercury, who I forget the name of the reporter, but the guy who...
Gary Webb. He shot himself twice in the head with a .38.
Twice?
Yes.
And he's the guy that reported about the CIA drug connection and the cocaine traffic.
Right, and but when you look at it I knew Gary and knew people around that story, and when you look at it very, very close, you find out that the story was leaked to him, okay, out of the Department of Justice, okay, and so again, and it was basically a message that was sent to the newsrooms that CIA drugs is a non-story. I mean, it's not going to help your career. It is not going to get published. We do an amazing book called A Terrible Mistake by Hank Albarelli. And here again was a book that was with agents with New York for many, many years. And we had a gentleman by the name of Nat Hentoff, a big reporter of the Village Voice, Wall Street Journal. He wanted to do a story on the book. He was not allowed.
Well, I mean, is it your contention that these publishing houses are told don't publish X, Y, and Z, or that they just, or couldn't it just be that they figured that's not going to sell enough copies?
Oh, no. They're most of them are owned lock, stock, and barrel. I mean, I'm 63 some years old, and when I was a kid, most towns had 2, 3, if not 4 newspapers. There was, 100 some companies bringing us news. Now it's down to 5 or 6. And a lot of it has to do with slush funds that have been developed from World War II, having to do with gold, and then also with the drugs. And these slush funds allow, let's say we had 2 sugar companies, and we don't, but if we had 2 sugar companies and one sugar company was bringing in cocaine and the other one wasn't, which one's going to be around, it's simple economics. And these people out of the shadows, the secret societies, own these media, and they control what is being said through them.
Let's go back to secret societies, Skull and Bones. I remember hearing a lot about that during the Bush years, both Bush administrations, and a lot of attacks made using that information, the connection, the spooky connection. And I always thought of Skull and Bones as sort of like a fraternity, an excuse for guys to get together and get drunk and chase girls.
No, it's it's a classic secret society, and it's very powerful. Been very powerful for, Lord have mercy, almost 200 years. And if you look at them today, gentlemen behind Sears and Kmart with a big bond, Eddie Lamprey, they own Blackstone, Federal Express. The Bush family, has created quite the political dynasty. They're very, very powerful.
And is it just Bush? It's not just a Republican thing. It's
no. Well, you have John Kerry in there too. It was very interesting. When you had John Kerry versus Bush, basically, I was told to sit down and shut up because nobody wanted to hear about it. And you had a situation there where, for my money, they stole both those elections, and you had Kerry put up not very much of a fight. When you join Skull and Bones, one thing you do every Thursday night is you tell them all about your every sexual thought and escapade that you've ever had. It's blackmailable. A secret society, I don't care if it's here in the United States or in deepest Africa or Asia, they're always the same. You have an outside group, a lot of people in Masonic circles, they call them porch brethren. They're there for favors and whatnot. Then you have an administrative cadre, because at any organization at any given time, you have the people who, turn the lights on and turn the lights off. And then you have the core group, and the core groups are always all related. Okay, the Skull and Bones is built around the Cabot family with a big strong subset of the Whitney family. And you have the core group then invites, say, the smart guy over at the Yale Lit, and then maybe the football captain. And then they have a party, and they say, hey, why don't you marry my sister? Okay, you look at John Kerry, all of his marriages all came from the Skull and Bones family.
We'll be talking about ancient aliens and secret societies put together by none other than Mike Berra. Have you been looking at these pictures from New Horizons on Pluto?
Oh, yeah, of course. They're spectacular and exciting. And the thing about them that's so interesting to me is that, once again, we continue to find out just how wrong NASA is about everything. They can't get anything right, because I think their models of the solar system and how it was created are all messed up. And Pluto to me is just another example of it, because for years, decades and decades, they told us it was an ice ball and probably covered with snow and ice, and they really didn't find much of anything to that effect. They found these mountains. They tried to say that these mountains were probably made of ice, but they have absolutely no basis for that statement. And you look at the pictures, and they look just like regular old Rocky Mountains to me. So then the question is, what are they going to find as the spacecraft continues its mission and goes out into what's supposed to be the Kuiper Belt? What if they get out there and they don't find any of the snowy objects that they're supposed to find? Which I think is probably what's going to happen. When does a point get reached? When do you reach critical mass to the point that NASA has to finally say, maybe our models of this whole solar system really aren't correct? Maybe how we think planets formed isn't the way they formed, and that to me is what's really exciting about it, because it kind of reinforces stances I've taken in books over the years. So I like that. I like NASA, giving me credibility when I don't even ask for it.
Well, and Pluto has 5 little moons around it. I mean, to me, it's a little planetary system. It's not a planetoid. It's a planet.
Yeah, and really, it is a planet, and Charon, which is the biggest of the moons, looks like a spherical planet. The rest of them kind of look like asteroids. And, our friend, the late Dr. Tom Van Flandern, his theory was that it was actually an escaped moon of Neptune because of some cataclysmic event that happened back in the early days of the solar system. And I think that that model is now really probably turning out to be correct, because neither of them appear to be small, icy dwarf planets, but they make a lot of sense as moons, because Pluto really fits into that size category and density category of a lot of the moons of Uranus and Neptune. So, I think we really are in a very exciting time. And the thing is, George, did you ever think we'd ever see anything like this in our lifetime? Because I never did.
Well, how old were you when we landed on the moon? Were you even born?
Yes, I was. I don't want to say how old I was, but I was old enough. Yeah, I was 9. I was 9.
Okay, you were a little boy.
Yeah.
You were a little boy. So, I was 19. So I witnessed it with my dad. Mm-hmm. I loved science, had a telescope. I was into all this, built little rockets. I did it all. I thought, answering your question, that we would have incredible technology one day and do all kinds of things. Mike, when I was a little kid, I built a little camera in the tip of a little rocket, and it took a picture, one shot, on its way down. And it was a little photograph, and gosh, I probably have it stored away in some box somewhere. It took a picture about 300 feet up of me and my friends looking up at it, and it was a little black and white photograph, and I'll just never forget it. And I said that day to my friends, I said, the time's going to come, we're going to take incredible pictures in space. And look what we're doing.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I mean, there's a picture that came out from Cassini, the probe around Saturn, and it was a picture of Saturn basically eclipsing the sun. So the sun was behind Saturn, and you saw the rings and some of the moons and the light coming through. And I guess I never really thought we'd see those kinds of things. I mean, maybe it's not that I didn't believe that we'd have advanced technology and things like this would happen, but I don't know. There was part of me that never thought they'd really share it with us, or that it would take so long, because I guess things slowed down so much after Apollo, and we really stopped developing technology, and it seemed like it took so long. Now we all finally have Captain Kirk's communicators, from Star Trek. We finally have those, but gosh, didn't it take a long time? I mean, it took a really, really long time for that to happen. And, I look at pictures from the 80s and stuff, and I think, what's really the difference between then and now? And the only thing I can really think of, and it's a huge difference, is the Internet. That's really the only really major technological advance that we've had, because phones are still phones. You've got, you had primitive computers then. We have more sophisticated computers now, but it seems like we haven't really advanced as much as I
think the smartphones, beyond just cell phones, the smartphones now are incredible, because people at a moment's notice, they've got their computers in their pockets or in their hands, and they're able to get any kinds of information. Somebody wants a question about Mike Barra, and they're out. They just go to their smartphone, and
they'll get a whole bunch
search
of
it.
BS about me that's not true.
And they get it all.
Yeah, right.
They get it all. So before we get into your book, Ceres, this object in the asteroid belt, which is, some call it an asteroid, others call it a dwarf planet. What the heck is it?
It's another moon. It's a moon of a destroyed planet, of which the asteroid belt is the remnants of that planet. I mean, some people have called it over the years. Phaeton is the name that was given to it. And, there were 2 planets in the solar system that are missing, one about the orbit where Mars is now, and we know that Mars was a moon of that planet, which was destroyed. And there was another planet, this other one, Phaeton, was where the asteroid belt is. So, Bode's law says there should have been planets there, and there really weren't. And I think Ceres is a moon of that large world that got destroyed in some sort of unimaginable cataclysm that probably had really, really terrible, devastating effects on everybody, on every planet in the solar system. And that's what I think it is. I think it's a moon. There's, again, how do a bunch of asteroids that supposedly collide together and somehow magically glue themselves together rather than break themselves apart, how do they form a sphere? How do they form that
It's amazing
shape? And it's like it doesn't happen that way. These things are, I think, fissioned off from the planets the way, again, Tom originally theorized back in the late 90s. And, Ceres is just fascinating to me because it clearly, I think, used to be part of a different solar system. I think we had all kinds of mini solar systems all over this solar system. We had many, many planets with many moons, and most of them are gone now, but Ceres survives.
They say it was discovered in 1801. Why are we just starting to talk about it now?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I guess that it was not considered all that important, although it was thought at first to be, a missing planet. That's what they were actually looking for.
I mean, I didn't know about it.
Yeah, and they were looking for a planet back in those days between Mars and Jupiter, and they found Ceres, which helped to really perpetuate the discovery of the asteroid belt itself. But I guess it just hasn't been a high priority, although looking at it now, some of the pictures we've seen, I think maybe it should have been a higher priority.
There's a pyramid on that thing, Mike.
Well, if you look at that pyramidal thing, I don't know, George, I don't really think that that's very pyramidal looking. I mean, it's weird to me that NASA called it a pyramid because it looks to me like a fairly common what they call a cinder cone, which is kind of a conical mountain. Now, it's weird that it's the only one on Ceres.
Yeah, it just pops right up.
Yeah, and that's a little strange because usually they're part of mountain ranges, but maybe one of your, maybe somebody like Stewart could come on and give us a little geologic assessment of it. But I didn't think it was really very pyramidal, and it weirded me out that they made mention of that. And then I thought about, well, what are they trying to distract us from besides the bright lights that they found? And, that was the same day, roughly, that the picture of the pyramidal kind of capstone rock, whatever you want to call it, on Mars was released from the Curiosity rover. So I kind of think maybe they wanted us to look at this pyramid that's not a pyramid and not really look at the pyramid on Mars that probably is a pyramid. So that's what I think was going on.
Lots of strange things going out there, Mike.
Yep.
Lots of strange things. Ancient aliens and secret societies. Tell me about this.
I'd done books about the moon, Ancient Aliens on the Moon, and I'd done 2 books on Mars, Ancient Aliens on Mars, and probably there could be a 3rd book in the Mars series because there's just so much stuff to look at on Mars.
Endless, yeah.
But, I started to think about what did I want to do next, and what really got me was, okay, this stuff exists, these civilizations did exist. Somebody seems to have known from our distant past that they were there because of other research I'd done for other projects. I knew that somebody knew that this stuff was out there before we ever ventured into space, and those people were primarily members of secret societies like the Scottish Rite Freemasons and the real freak show of Aleister Crowley followers that operated out of JPL for a number of years and probably still do. And I started looking at all this, and again looking at all the SS members, all the Nazi members like Werner von Braun who had worked at NASA, and I began to think, okay, how did this information get from the ancient aliens to the guys who were working at NASA? Because I felt like there was definitely a connection there. And I started to think about how do we connect that thread? And the first thought that I had was that this book was going to be, a lot about the stuff that I'd found in NASA, about a lot of the participation of the Nazis, the Freemasons, the so-called magicians out there at JPL, and the things that they had done, and all the stellar alignment work that I'd done, and the fact that they seemed to always want to land with Orion's belt and 33 degrees above the landing site, those types of things that just kept coming up. And I thought I was going to write a book about that. And then as I got into this, it kind of really began to shift for me, because I realized there was a lot of other stuff, other holes that were now being filled in. And the main thing was that all this stuff seemed to connect back to the Sitchin stories of the Anunnaki, these guys who came to Earth 400,000 years ago, and according to the legend, made us from them by manipulating our genetics and crossing us with them. So I started going off in that direction, and the more I dug into that, the more it appeared like there was these two different aspects to this. There's the very, very ancient story, and then there's everything that happened after the flood. And so then I started asking questions, well, did a flood really happen? And that started me, that was chapter 1, was there actually a flood? And, as I dug into that information, more and more, it became more and more obvious to me that there definitely was this flood that took place, and you've had a million guests on that have talked about it, and all the different legends from ancient cultures that have talked about floods and flood myths and arcs and everything. And then I actually found some charts and stuff and put them together, and there are 35 or 45 different ancient cultures that have these flood myths that connect with an ark and with a higher angel or god telling somebody that there's going to be this huge flood, and you're going to have to build a boat. You're basically going to have to build an ark to survive this thing. So, that got me started on chapter 1, and I started then to focus on, okay, what really could have caused a global flood? And, there are really only a couple of answers. And the one that really stuck out was this idea of research of a guy named Randall Carlson, who is a geologist and has basically come to believe that there's something called the Younger Dryas impact event.
That means big freeze.
Yeah, about 12,000 years ago. But at the time, what it would have done is it would have, and again, looking at the pattern, the scatter pattern, he went back and looked at a lot of different evidence. One of the best evidence being these objects called nanodiamonds, which are really, really tiny, minute little diamonds that are formed during high-speed, high-temperature impact events like comets and asteroids.
And heavy compression.
And they found these in a pattern basically sweeping across the northern hemisphere into North America. And I think they at least found 22 different sites, all dated to this one period of about 12,000 to 13,000 years ago, right around that time. And so it looks as though some sort of object like a comet came in and broke up and just scattershot it all across Europe and the Atlantic Ocean and North America. And if that had hit the huge polar ice caps that existed at that time with that kind of heat and impact, there's a couple things that could have happened. First of all, stuff would have instantly melted. Massive amounts of ice would have instantly melted, or massive amounts of water would have been, basically steam would have been ejected into the upper atmosphere and then fallen as rain. And as I dug deeper and deeper into it and talked to Randall more and more, I raised the specific question: could it have actually rained for 40 days and 40 nights if something like that had happened? And he said, yeah, absolutely. If the object was big enough and there were enough pieces and they were going fast enough, and these are the limits and they're all well within known parameters of impact events, and it hit the northern polar cap, which was massive at that time, he said easily it could have rained like that for even longer than 40 days and 40 nights, and that would have basically covered the entire Earth with water. So, I had a plausible scenario, and there's also another theory which is really, really interesting that is very popular with the Christian researchers, and that's this idea of a water vapor canopy. The idea that the Earth's atmosphere at one time was a lot thicker. Mm-hmm. And, they use that to explain, well, why did Methuselah and some of the people in the Bible, the very early patriarchs, why did they live 800, 900 years? And, the theory is that this very, very thick atmosphere basically protected us from a lot of the damaging radiation that damages and breaks down our DNA. And so instead of living only maybe 100 to 120 years, we were living 800, 900, maybe even 1,000 years while we were protected by this. And if an object like a comet or an asteroid went through this canopy and shattered it and broke it up and made it fall to the Earth, it would have fallen to the Earth as rain, and it would have covered the entire planet. And kind of looking at those two scenarios, both of them made a certain amount of sense to me. And, you start to look at the biblical verses, George, and they absolutely fit with that information.
They do. These secret societies, Mike, are we talking about the Masons and people like that?
Yeah, the Freemasons, the Nazis or the SS, and what I call the magicians, who were followers of Aleister Crowley and other practitioners of black magic and stuff. They're the three main ones that I think are significant because they ended up at NASA. Now, you hear about other stuff like, the Illuminati, but the truth is, George, I can't find any evidence that the Illuminati actually existed, whereas I can tell you for a fact, I can quote you chapter and verse, the fact that Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the surface of the moon and the only man on Apollo 11 who was photographed on the surface of the moon, went there, in his personal preference kit with a Masonic flag, a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason Masonic ceremonial apron that he took to the surface of the moon, and I am 95% sure I can basically prove that he performed a Masonic ceremony in the lunar module before he and Neil Armstrong went out on the surface of the moon.
What kind of ceremony would that be, Mike?
It would be what's normally called a communion ceremony. He's admitted that he did do this, that he basically broke bread and ate it and then poured wine and drank it, which is, again, theoretically a Christian ceremony. But if you dig into the background of it, it actually is a ceremony, an offering to the Egyptian god Osiris, who's represented by the constellation of Orion in the stellar religion of the ancient Egyptians, and is also depicted on all kinds of NASA patches, like the original Apollo patch actually had Orion on it for some strange reason, and that's got no connection to the Greek Apollo myth, so why it would be Orion on there, it's unless it was connected to the Egyptian is really hard to figure out. One of the lunar modules was named Orion, and they recently had the Orion program, so NASA kind of has this Osiris obsession. And, in fact, Buzz Aldrin went ahead and performed that ceremony on the surface of the moon. And I can show you that. So when I think of the secret societies, I look at the ones that I know exist that I can actually put my finger on. Some of them, the Illuminati, I can't really put my finger on them because there's really no proof that they exist other than the rumors.
Mike, let's get back to the Ark story a moment and this big freeze event as well. If the Ark story is correct, and we're going to use a little mythology here with you and biblical talk too, where is Noah's Ark? Where is it?
Well, the main place that everybody's always looked or always thought they would find it has been Turkey, because the Bible says that it came to rest in the mountains of Ararat, and that is known to be around what they consider to be, Mount Ararat. The problem is that it was Marco Polo, I think in the 1300s, who actually gave Mount Ararat its name. But there are there's other areas around there, very mountainous next to Ararat, that are actually also called Ararat or variations of that name.
It's brutal terrain, isn't it?
It is very brutal. It is very high, and so that's where people have focused their attention. And the thing is, look, if there was an advanced civilization, an Atlantean civilization, and it was probably connected to the Anunnaki, Sitchin's Anunnaki, and they did survive, or they taught some humans, Enki anyway. The big thing that the story is that the story goes that Enlil, who was the ruler of the earth, didn't like mankind very much and was willing to let us be wiped out by the flood. But Enki, who was the creator, one of the creators of the human race, really loved us and wanted to save us. So that's why the God in the biblical version, who is has to be one God, not two, kind of is of two minds. On the one hand, he wants to destroy mankind. On the other hand, he decides to tell Noah to build an ark and save mankind. So the fact is that if there was a great flood, and there appears to be very solid evidence that there was, then logically there would be an ark. So why don't we go look and dig into the ark? That was my next question. And I found out there's quite a bit of background stuff on the Ark and on people that have searched for it over the years, and there's a lot of interesting stories. And turns out that there's two, I think, pretty good candidates that could both be the ruins, the wreckage of the Ark.
Now, of course, I find it hard to believe, Mike, that he was able to take every animal in pairs on an Ark.
Right.
What if he took DNA, however?
Yeah, that's what I think exactly, because actually some of the old writings from the various cultures say not just that he took animals 2 by 2, but he took the seeds, not just the seeds of the earth like the plants, but the seeds 2 by 2. And that could mean the seeds of the animals, which is also just genetic sampling, DNA. And, again, if you look at the stuff that Sitchin translated, the Anunnaki were nothing if not master genetic manipulators, and there's no reason why they couldn't have cataloged a lot of the flora and fauna and the animals and so forth that were here on Earth. And in fact, also, George, if you look at the history of a lot of these animal species, some of them didn't exist until around the time of the flood.
That's
if the
right.
flood was 12,000 years ago. So it's possible some of them were cobbled together after this whole thing happened, and they were, society and culture and civilization was being rebuilt. So, as I dug into this, what I found is that there was this object called the Ararat anomaly, which was photographed in a 1947 reconnaissance flight photograph on Mount Ararat itself, very, very high up, about 11,000 feet. And, the interesting thing about that is that there are stories of people who went and claimed that they saw the Ark in the early 1900s. George Hagopian was one of the people who claimed that as a little boy in like 1904 or 1905, he actually climbed up on the Ark. And
what happened to it?
Well, his dad shot at it, by the way. Yeah, so that's
nice.
I'm like, here's Noah's Ark. Let's shoot at it.
Yeah, same with Bigfoot.
Yeah, he said it was fossilized and stone-like. But, he claimed that they were able to get up to this certain level that is not normally accessible because it was such a hot summer and so much of the ice had melted, and he described it very specifically and made paintings of it. And then later on, in the 1930s, I believe, another researcher or farmer was walking up there in the area, and he claimed to have come upon the same wreckage, only now it had been cleaved into two halves. It had been broken into two parts, and they were separated. And when you look at this Ararat anomaly images, if you look at the images, what you see is that it looks like the Ark is in two pieces. It's broken in half, and the ice has kind of come back in. And like the ice, when it grew back and rebuilt, it sort of split this wooden structure or stone structure by now because it was fossilized in half. So those stories are really interesting. And what's fascinating is that the paintings that were made based on the recollections of these two different guys were extremely similar, and the terrain was extremely similar, even though they really didn't know of each other's stories when they were first put together. So I thought that was really pretty interesting. But then there came up information on another site called the Darunapar site, because it was found again by, I think, a Turkish aerial reconnaissance pilot named, I forget his first name, but his last name was Darunapar, and he saw a boat-like outline in.
We've seen that picture, I think.
Yeah, and there were some expeditions there, and there were people who said, well, we didn't really find anything, we didn't find any wood. Well, after 10 or 12,000 years, the wood is going to become fossilized. It's going to basically take on the texture and the properties of the rock around it. And there have since been some other people that have gone there. There's a guy named David Fassold who was very, very interested in this area, and he brought ground-penetrating radar, among other things. And what he found, and this is one of the images that's up on the Facebook page, is basically when he used this ground-penetrating radar, he found that there were right-angular cross-supporting beams buried under the mud and the dirt. And basically what you're looking at is a couple of keel beams and some cross beams and all of this stuff, plus the fact that they found rivets there, they found metal rivets, they found all kinds of other features like supports on the side, outside supports that appeared to be structural and curved like you would on the outside of a boat, and the fact that it is exactly 500 Egyptian cubits long, which is exactly the length given in the Bible for the Ark, makes it, to me, pretty convincing that I think that might be the site. That's at about 6,500 feet. that might actually be the site where the Ark did come to rest, and this thing might actually be the Ark of Noah. So,
what a great discovery if that happens.
Yeah, and, again, it's debatable. It's up for debate, but there's a lot of study that's been done, and, I'm convinced that one of those two sites is probably really the Ark.
Many of us all know the theories of the late Zecharia Sitchin, Mike, of which he believes that there was a planet in our solar system called Nibiru, 3,600-year elliptical orbit,
right,
and that the inhabitants of that planet, the Anunnaki, came here to mine for gold, then genetically manipulated the creatures that were on this planet, and hence here we are. You have a different twist to this.
Well, I think that some of the things that have been said about the Anunnaki that Sitchin wrote early in his career are not the same as the things he wrote later. And people don't seem to pay as much attention to his later books, but they should, because this, was far deeper into his research path, and he understood things better. For instance, it's often said that we were created as a slave race. Well, no, we weren't. And apparently, according to Sitchin, there were actually very long moral debates about whether we should be created at all, because we would not be creatures, we would be beings, as they described it. In other words, conscious beings with souls, and they didn't think that that was on the same level as creatures, so they didn't treat us that way. So that's kind of a misreported aspect of his research. As I got into this, I started watching, I watched the film Noah, and it was really fascinating. It was weird to me because there was the sky was different and things were different on the earth, and there were these guys called the Watchers. And I started asking myself, who are the Watchers? They're mentioned in the Bible a few times. They're called angels. There were something like 200 of them, and in the film, they are basically neither divine angelic beings nor are they fully beings of the earth.
They were rocks, weren't
right,
they?
but because they have that aspect, that earthly aspect, they were bound to the earth, it said. And, and then I started reading, after that, I started reading Sitchin's book, The Lost Book of Enki, which is advertised as historical fiction. But the truth is, I have a friend who knew Sitchin extremely well. And I talked to him about it, and I said, look, what can you tell me about this book? And what he told me, and I probably shouldn't say this on the air, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that at the end, Sitchin was not getting his information from the clay tablets and cylinder seals, but that he was getting it directly from the Anunnaki themselves.
Oh, really?
And that story in there is not fiction at all, that it was actually supposedly, quote, according to Sitchin, he says Sitchin
almost like
told
they
him
wrote it
his,
through him, or he wrote it through them.
That Enki dictated this, because it's basically Enki's story of the things that happened.
Wow.
These things that happened, and the way things really happened from 400,000 years ago to today. And then I thought, well, I'd better read this as part of my research. And I got into it, and I found the story, George, is it's absolutely tragic, really.
Tragic and fascinating.
It's like they had the same human foibles that we had, even though they might have had advanced technology.
Maybe more.
Yeah, and there were all sorts of things. Girls get involved, and the men cross-marrying and everything, and the rivalry between Enki and Enlil over who was going to run the planet was very intense, because Enki was actually born first, but according to the legal laws of succession, he was born to a concubine, not to a legal spouse, whereas Enlil came along later. And there was a big fight between who was the wiser and who was the one who really should run the planet. But Enki was the scientist, and, he helped create the Adamu, the very first man. And, there's other things. People look at some of these images of and think of them as giants, and the Anunnaki as giants. And, I'm not convinced that they were. I don't think they were really very much different from us in terms of their physical stature, because you look at some of these images where Ninhursag or Ninmah, as she's called, is holding the Adamu, and they're saying, oh, well, look at how much bigger she is. And it's like, that's because he's a baby, There's this missing aspect to it. So, because then also they couldn't have interbred with human females. And if they were some gigantic size, they simply wouldn't have been able to physically put it together. So what got me really going on this and really starting to look at this in a whole new way was the fact that what that meant to me was that their intentions were not to enslave us, to treat us as less than them. They did try to limit us to a certain extent, because they didn't want us to make the same mistakes that they had made.
Or revolt.
Right, or revolt. And it turns out that there were 200 guys working on Mars, the exact same number of the Watchers in the Bible, and just like the Watchers in the Bible, they came to Earth for some R&R, and they complained about their situation, that there were no women there. Mars needs women, apparently. It was a lonely place, and they needed women, and they were unhappy with their circumstances, and they didn't get good enough answers from Enlil. And what they did was that they picked wives for themselves, and they kidnapped them and stole them away and did revolt. And they were called the Ijiji. So the Watchers and the Ijiji seem to be the same thing. And it's just fascinating to read these stories. And the name of their commander was Satanal, Satanail, Satanail or Satanal. So, gee, where do we get the name Satan from? So, as you start to put all these things together, it becomes really obvious to me that all this ancient stuff, all these stories, are probably a lot different than we think, and even different maybe than Sitchin interpreted them originally, because he changed a bunch of information as he started writing this historical novel. And I'm like, well, why would he do that? Why wouldn't he be consistent with what he wrote unless he was corrected by some new source? And, it also kind of really aligned with information I got from Bob Dean, who has done, read the official book. And he told me, he said it very publicly, extraterrestrials are not working with the government. They are the government, that there are Anunnaki still here on this planet.
So they never left.
They never left. They tried to, a lot of them left. Most of them left because it's like the moment in the Lord of the Rings where one of the elves says, it's the time of man now, and we need to leave and let men run things. And it was the same analogy that was made, that I think at the end of their big battle, that Enki and Enlil, kind of agreed that they needed to go away and let us have our own path. But I don't think they really left. And I've been, again, told directly by a source who knew him very well that book was dictated to him by Enki, who is still here. And if their lifespans were as long as Sitchin thought they were, that's not impossible. He could certainly have lived another 5, 6, 7, 8,000 years right into today, and he wouldn't be a whole lot older than he was back then, back in about 5,000 BC, when I think they all packed up and pretty much went away. And you had, I think, some Anunnaki who probably stayed behind here because they would rather be kings on Earth and be worshipped as gods than be workers back on Nibiru. And I think the last of that line of guys was probably Goliath, who was, slain by David. And I'm sure he was a big guy. Maybe he was 6 or 7 feet tall, but
maybe 8.
Yeah,
and
David, David killed him and sort of established our own kingly line. And so all these things begin to come together, and they all begin to focus on one guy who stayed behind and stayed in charge. And that guy's name is Marduk. And he was a son of Enki, and he is the guy for whom Cairo is named. Cairo is an Arabic word meaning Mars. The planet Mars was changed to that name because of him, and he was there for a while running things, and he's the one, I think, who started the secret society.